Please.
Okay, if I could advise members and those in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are on airplane mode and all devices are muted. They can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Password details are available on the gallery rules. It is not, I repeat, it is not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. Can I inform members that there are 3 oral briefing sessions, evidence sessions, and they will be hand-started today. Okay, can I have apologies? Agenda item number 1 is apologies. I have one from Claire Bailey. Any further apologies? No, we'll move on. Agenda item number 2 is draft minutes of meetings. Meetings on the 16th of June and the 21st of June. Pages 5 to 15 of your meeting packs. Can I ask members, are they content that both sets of minutes are a true reflection of the proceedings of the meetings? If so, I will say. Members agreed? Agreed, yeah? Agreed. Swan? Okay, thank you. Okay, agenda item number 3 then is matters arising. Item number 1 then is the committee work programme. I advise members that the Department has had to postpone the written briefing paper on the Secretary of State's direction under section 1A7 of the Prison Act Northern Ireland 1953 as amended by Schedule 4 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998, the Devolution of Policing and Justice Foundations Order 2010. Which was on the work programme for today's meeting, as the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State of the Northern Ireland Office, Ben Wallace MP, has raised a number of queries. It has now been signed off, however, and it will be rescheduled for consideration in early September. Members would note that. Item number 2 then is the, in matters arising, is the consultation on the draft Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery Strategy 2016-17. Can I inform members that the Department has advised that the 10-week public consultation on the draft Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery Strategy will be launched on Friday the 1st of July. And then item number 3 then of matters arising, informal strategic planning meeting which we've just had. Thank you very much for your contribution, members. Very important and very worthwhile meeting. Again, can I seek the agreement of members to request detailed information from the Department on the key legislative, budget and policy issues it intends to bring to the Committee for consideration during the 2016-17 session to inform the next strategic planning meeting in September that we will hold. And that meeting will take place on the 8th of September somewhere, probably outside of Parliament buildings, somewhere remote, so we get maybe kill 2 birds with 1 stone with regards to village. I'm hearing all options from Strabane to Ballymena. I'm hearing, but we'll see where it ends up. Okay, members, and again, we'll maybe revisit this in Chairperson's business with regards to some of the issues that we actually discussed. Agenda item number 4 then is the overview on justice, the key issues and priorities. Can I advise members that the Minister of Justice, Claire Sugden, MLA, and officials will attend the meeting to discuss the key main issues facing the Department of Justice and her key priorities. A copy of the first day brief is at pages 18 to 124 of the meeting pack. Can I very welcome, Minister Claire Sugden, MLA, Minister of Justice. Thank you very much for attending, Minister. And Anthony Harbison, Director, Safer Communities Directorate, and David Lavery, Director of Access to Justice Directorate. To the meeting, you're all very welcome. No strangers to this committee, also, obviously, but obviously, Minister, your first time. We'll try and make it as pleasant an experience as possible for you, if we can. And certainly we're keen to hear from you in your new role. Can I advise that the session is being recorded by Hansard, and the transcript will be published on the committee website when possible. So can I just, without further ado, invite the Minister then to outline the main justice issues and our key priorities. Thank you.
Chair, thank you very much for your kind comments, and I congratulate you on your position as Chair, and indeed the rest of the committee. I don't want for getting elected, because, you know, a month down the line I know I'm still feeling it, and indeed for your new position on the committee. I'm here just, I suppose it's a month now really into the mandate to outline some of the challenges that we're anticipating and indeed the opportunities we face. You know, I'm very much of the mind that we can keep moving forward as best we can and do that in the most positive way. Of course there will be challenges, no one ever said there wouldn't be, but to be honest, if there wasn't I wouldn't have taken the job. But it's how we manage those challenges that will, I hope, characterise my ministerial next 5 years. So with me are David Lavery, Director of Access to Justice, and Anthony Harbison, Director of Safer Communities, who I believe you have met in sort of recent weeks to outline their different directorates. And other officials have also appeared, and I do hope you find their briefings useful. But you know, it goes without saying that should you need further information, my department's always open in doing that. And really just to, I suppose, reiterate the fact that I am keen that the committee and I have a really good working relationship, myself and my department. I think that's been the case in the past, and it's certainly something I think we should encourage moving forward. And I always welcome the scrutiny. For me, scrutiny is an opportunity to sort of build on the work we do and to ensure that the direction of travel that we're going in is the right one. So I really do value the work that you will do in the next 5 years. Before I say something about developing priorities, I would again just like to pay tribute to the Justice Committee. I've already said this, so I'm just going to move on. Chair, I've spoken previously about 2 issues which guide me personally and which will be important for me delivering the justice agenda. First and foremost, and it was quite interesting actually, because I was looking at my manifesto for my election campaign, and my first priority was that we have a better government. And now when I wrote that, I would never envisage that I would be inside that government, but I am, and it's an opportunity to change things from within. And I think what will characterise this new government is that it will be joined up. I certainly feel very supported by my executive colleagues, and the direction of travel is that we will look at things in a holistic manner. So it's that outcomes-based approach that we are seeing in the new programme for government. Appreciate it's not everything that everyone wants, but it's a really good start. It's a tested model as seen in the Scottish executive, and certainly again it will require the input from everybody, not just within the executive but also outside it, so that members and indeed in wider civic society. In the current draft framework, the outcome of a safe community where we respect the law and each other is underpinned by 3 justice indicators: reducing crime, reducing reoffending, and increasing the effectiveness of the justice system. In terms of how we do this, problem-solving approaches were discussed in the last Justice Committee, and we are committed to this approach in the department in the context of delivering the programme for government outcomes. I suppose I've already alluded to it, but my second guiding principle concerns civic engagement. And it is in the context of the programme for government, but even just in my own personal context, you know, I am always a believer that we're here for the people of Northern Ireland, and that should be the direction of travel, where, you know, they tell us what needs to happen to make Northern Ireland better, and then we put that to our officials and hopefully implement it in the best way that we can. And I think it builds stronger and effective communities, and by all means, I'm the first person to listen to someone on the ground, and I think that should be something, you know, to encourage throughout this Assembly and indeed within the wider executive. In terms of my very early, I suppose almost immediate priorities within the Justice Department, I've taken office at a time of year where, you know, typically we can have problems within Northern Ireland, and it must be a priority to ensure that we can manage that in the best way that we can. I suppose that's really, again, trying to acknowledge back, you know, the role that we have in connecting our communities with, you know, the wider justice system, the families in this executive, and it's about ensuring that everybody on the ground is on the same page as we are. I'm also conscious of the ongoing threat from distance and the devastation and disruption these groups can have. I've met with the Chief Constable, George Hamilton, on several occasions. I also maintain a close working relationship with the Secretary of State, and I will continue to make public order and security issues my priority. I also want to pay tribute to staff and colleagues who work on the front line, and I will be taking time to visit with them and gain a fuller understanding of the issues they face on a day-to-day in their work. In my own personal experience and in my early weeks as Minister, where I've met some of these people, I do want to gain an understanding of where they're coming from. Happy workforce, as they say. But, you know, I do see it very much as my responsibility to look after the people that I oversee. And we do need to give support to them and ensure that they're not alone in moving forward. And I will allude to the murders of David Black and Aidan Ismay, and I really do extend my deep sympathies to their families and friends, but also the wider frontline service staff. As I said, I am keen to ensure that we look after them. My second immediate priority is the Fresh Start Agreement and responding to the three-person panel report. The three-person panel report was published in May, and it was our intention to have an action plan responding to that report at the end of June. Now, I hope you'll appreciate in a week of exceptional politics, and it's a week that will probably not end anytime soon. We haven't had the opportunity to really bring that action plan forward, but I think it's reasonable enough to suggest that we will have that in the very, very near future. Certainly the noise that we're getting from that particular report has been very positive. The people that we have engaged with, so it's not just a piece of work within my own department, it reaches out the other executive departments, other agencies as well. I was more than content that we decided to publish that publicly, so I hope you've all had foresight of that particular report, and when the action plan's in place, you, again as a committee, you will have an opportunity to look at that and scrutinise that. Third immediate priority, and again I've alluded to it in my last comments, was the result of the EU referendum, and I suppose the steps that we must now take across the executive and the UK government. I suppose it's no secret that I was disappointed by the outcome of the EU referendum personally. But I fully accept the fact that it was a UK referendum, and I think what we have to do now is ensure that Northern Ireland can put its best foot forward in terms of the implications of that. From a Justice Department perspective, we have already been looking at what we need to do and what the potential consequences and, to be fair, opportunities there might be from this. It was agreed or I have directed my officials to look at that and to start on that piece of work as soon as possible, and indeed it has been ongoing prior to even the result. I'm conscious that as the second Justice Minister, I take over from a department which has worked hard across 6 years to deliver reform and tackle difficult issues. And at this point, I would want to pay tribute to my predecessor, David Ford. My work moving forward will build on a lot of the work that he has done, and I think it's important to note that. I come to this post to deliver my objective within the executive, which is accountable to yourselves as Justice Committee and also to the wider Northern Ireland Assembly. I'm not going to offer any precise details. Certainly in the coming weeks I'm going to be looking at my own priorities as Justice Minister and how I'll move them forward when we come back into session in September. I hope the first day brief and your sessions with senior officials from my department have given you a sense of the scale and the depth of this department, and I do work closely with my officials to put together a programme which will support and deliver the programme for government in the wider executive. And I think a lot of these will even match up to my own priorities that I wish to sort of drive forward when I sort of get a programme in place. I think there may be some common ground with the last mandate because of some strategic issues which were inevitably a work in progress as the mandate closed. Legal aid and prison reform, for example. Considerable work was done by the previous Justice Minister and the Department on those issues, and I note that David Ford was very open about the issues that still need to be addressed. In thinking about my own priorities, the committee will know that I have a specific interest, particularly around domestic violence. I suppose addressing crimes and the fear of crime in older people. I also have an interest around mental health and maybe looking at where my department can make an impact, where there may be instances of young people with ADHD, autism, and particularly adults with learning disabilities. Again, there's a lot of these things that I need to sort of tease out the detail in, but I look forward to coming back to you at some point in the future to discuss these in more depth. Resources, so whilst it's great to have a plan and an aim to that plan, I think we have to be realistic about, the resources that we have. And by all means, I am, and I will not be putting forward anything that's unattainable in that respect. But I think we can see how we can strategically move forward on that. The Department's finances are clearly something that will continue to be a challenge as we approach the next budget period. And I am aware that despite cuts over the years, that protecting frontline staff is a priority for me. That has meant much greater cuts to the core department and back office areas, but it will not be possible to take these cuts and protect the front line indefinitely. And if there are further cuts in the next budget period, some difficult decisions will no doubt have to be made. However, to say that's not there are not any opportunities to do things more efficiently and in a more innovative, perhaps creative way that hasn't happened before. Securing capital funding in the next budget period will also be a priority to invest in areas like the prison estate, as well as improving outcomes. Investment will help reduce running costs. Chair, while most of my opening comments have looked to the future, I've used my first weeks to take some key decisions and have meetings with partners and stakeholders. I have launched a review of sentencing arrangements, for instance, on the 9th of June, and I have spoken in the Assembly on motions concerning illegal drugs and animal welfare. Yesterday, I launched the Organised Crime Task Force strategy, and I have opened an event aimed at increasing understanding about human trafficking and forced labour. I've visited both McGilligan and Hydebank, and I've met with new recruits to the prison service in their passing out parade. I've also met with the Chief Constable on a number of occasions, the Lord Chief Justice, the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Secretary of State, and a number of other colleagues and stakeholders. I think it's also important to put on record that I have sought meetings with all the political parties, including the smaller parties. Again, that's in mind that I would be interested to hear how they feel I could drive my department forward. I might not always agree, but I am keen to hear their views. And I will continue to have this engagement because, again, for me, the opportunity of being Justice Minister is not necessarily just to be scrutinised. The scrutinising opportunity is to build a strong purpose moving forward. So, Chair, if you are content, I will leave it there, but happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. And you definitely put a lot of work into that and kept it concise, which we're very, very grateful for. I suppose I'll start off with regards to questions, and of course, the first time the Minister comes to any new committee, there's going to be a wide range of topics and discussions and questions around your wide brief. And it is such a wide brief, and you've if I don't mind saying, there's a number of monsters within that, PSNI, Prison Service, to name a few, Youth Justice Agency, everything that works around that, Probation Board. There's some massive pieces of life in there within your department. And I suppose my first question will be on the practicalities of how your department reaches the people and what the people see, the whites of the eyes of the department, the way I would put it, in places like Railway Street Drug Addiction Service, the rescue services when people get stuck up mountains when they're hiking on Duke of Edinburgh events. And it's all of those areas whereby they do a great service, which actually takes pressure off the PSNI. We realise and we see all the funding going towards PSNI. We understand why that is, But if there's pressure on department budgets, the first places that seem to be cut are the smaller minutiae, the people who actually deliver on the ground and save people's lives on many occasions, both in drug awareness and in rescue. And I suppose I would ask, Minister, do you see any time where you'll get a chance to actually review the work that those organisations do and enhance the support that the Justice Department gives to those organisations that do sterling work?
Yeah, I would like to see more opportunities than not, if I'm quite honest. You know, if there's one thing that I really want to do moving forward, and if it can become a legacy of mine as Justice Minister, it's to humanise this department. Justice, just by its very nature, you know, almost sits outside of the executive, you know, in terms of how the Justice Ministry is appointed, and just the very nature around that, you know, and there are very valid reasons for that to be the case, but that doesn't mean that we can't start to integrate it into the wider executive. And certainly I would like to ensure that we do that, and I think there's an opportunity actually with the type of politician that I am to enable to do that. You know, I'm very much about putting people first, and indeed, you know, the groups that you talk about, you know, we have met with those, and it's something that if we haven't met with them yet, it's in our diary to do that, or will be in my mind to do that. I think, you know, this department should be very much driven by, you know, the best outcomes for the people of Northern Ireland, and that would always be the first and forefront thing in my mind. So yes, but we need to talk to them. If there are issues, I would always suggest that those people come forward to me or to, you know, my department officials, and we can look at it. There's not a thing that comes into my department that I don't see and sign off on. So I'm quite keen to, you know, for people to engage in as best way we can. This is not a case that we sit on a pedestal. This is a case that we do what's right for the people of Northern Ireland, and it's something that will drive me every day.
You mentioned your first priority and second priority being law and order, and the Fresh Start then is your second priority, and of course they're very, very important issues in the realms of Northern Ireland and the history that we've come through. Is there anything that you've seen in the last number of weeks since you've been Minister that really frightens you about all of that? Is there something there that you feel that...
Truthfully, no, not yet. Now, perhaps this is the honeymoon period, I'm not quite sure, but I must admit I've been more content as Minister in a month than I have been as an MLA in 2 years. I'm really quite enamoured by how together our executive is, and the support that I've received from both of the main parties within that executive. And I'm confident that that's a picture of how we will do things moving forward. As I said from the outset, of course there are challenges, but for me those challenges are not a concern. It's how we manage those challenges. And if the past month is a reflection of what the next 5 years is going to be, then I think there's a real opportunity to get things moving forward in Northern Ireland and actually start doing it right for a change.
Okay. One massive aspect of your department is the prison service, and of course we've seemed to have stumbled from, whilst we strive to change and reform, we do seem to have stumbled in from one crisis to another. And of course we you know, unfortunately we have had to live with the murders and of the prison service personnel that you've already alluded to very succinctly and sensitively. You've visited the prisons, as you've said. Is there things there that you see that with a fresh set of eyes, which you are, that there's something that needs to be done sooner rather than later?
I think essentially the prison estate in itself. You know, and I don't think anyone around this table, you know, would deny the fact that we do need to move or progress in that as quickly as possible. And indeed, in respect of Magilligan and the other institutions, there is an outline business case that has been approved, but that will be subject to funding, which, you know, we have bid for, and hopefully, you know, that will be a positive outcome in that respect. For me, as I said again, and I think it was sort of weaved through my opening comments, is that I am keen to ensure that, you know, we look after the frontline service, and if that, you know, that means looking after prison officers and finding out ways to do that, then, you know, by all means, let's look at that. There are issues, you know, in respect of that, and, you know, I acknowledge that. But moving forward, it's how we deal with them, and it's something that I'm willing to tackle. It's something that we need to tackle. For all aspects of the prison service and the purpose of why they exist, we need to looking at our frontline service and and how that impacts on the rehabilitation of prisoners and those other outcomes. So, yes, it's. I wouldn't say there's any immediate concerns. There has been, I suppose, reports in this past year, but I'm content that those reports, whilst they seem quite damaging at the start, there was almost an immediate stability in that. But that's still a work in progress, and I think as a department we acknowledge that, and it's something that we have a keen focus on moving forward.
Some of the problems, not to put a too simplistic point on it, but a lot of the issues around the prison service seems to be around staffing numbers and the capabilities and capacities of the staff or the establishment at any given time to effectively run the prison properly. Are you concerned at the present levels of staffing and the sickness and everything else that comes with that?
I think we can acknowledge that sickness levels are probably higher than what we would hope them to be. My understanding is that I think 50% of sickness absence comes from perhaps work-related stress, but the other 50% comes from perhaps more natural causes. But it is something that we need to address. But again, just to reiterate, we are keeping a keen focus on it. And if it starts becoming a problem, then I think I would hope that we would be able to address it in the best way we can.
With regards to the actual organisation of the Justice Department, you have 4 directorates, and I've mentioned this to your directors in the last number of weeks, whereby do you see a potential issue there with regards to the Youth Justice Agency is now within the Directorate of Reducing Offending and if you like, lumped beside or within Northern Ireland Prison Service?
I fully understand where the concern might be there, but I think it's where it currently is perhaps necessary in terms of how we address it. And to me, it's probably more of a perception issue rather than an actual operational issue in how the Youth Justice Agency performs. I met with Youth Justice Agency actually this morning, and I suppose what really struck me with that, Chair, was the fact that if they're almost getting, if young people in particular are getting to the point of custody, then we've already failed. So this has to be a more upstream kind of approach, and I suppose our difficulty as a department is that it's almost triggered with us when it gets to that point, and I don't really think it's good enough. And again, I think it almost coincides with the new programme for government and working together with other departments that perhaps we could identify those problems earlier on, and I do think Justice has a part in doing so, but that will be working with health, it will be working with education and indeed other departments, perhaps communities, in seeing that we could perhaps not get to that point. To me, it will be an indicator will be that we will have less people coming through, those or through the criminal justice system. But we nearly need to go further upstream to hope that we never get to that, because the wider implications of that are not just on the person; it's on the family. It's just on wider society. There's huge implications, and I would imagine that most of those, if young offenders are being taken into custody, that's not going to stop there. It's going to go on to Highbank, and then it's perhaps going to go on to the more mainstream institutions. So I think we need to start stripping this back a little bit and seeing how we can play a part in this wider justice argument.
You'll have known by now, Minister, the work that this committee done in the previous mandate around the innovation in the court service and the good work that the previous chair, Alistair Ross, who I pay tribute to now, had done along with the committee members. I would stress, Minister, that be something we'd be keen also to push forward on, and I know that the department has picked up on a lot of that and is keen, hopefully, to pursue it. You would have our 100% support on that, Minister. We hope to see progression in that regard. I could spend all day asking questions of you, but I know I have a committee sitting in front of me here keen to ask questions also. The last question I will ask you in this at this part is domestic violence. You've already said it's a keen priority, or a key priority for you as an individual MLA moving forward, and now you're a minister. It's something that's close to our hearts too in the committee. I haven't spoken to many of the members, something I've spoken of in the Assembly Chamber last mandate. I brought forward the child protection disclosure schemes. I am a wee bit concerned about the take-up of that. I don't believe that maybe it's been promoted the way it should. I can understand why, because there's a practicality around this and it's a new process and there is a bedding in period. I would hope that in the future that would be progressed and advertised much more thoroughly and widespread, so that more people would uptake that. But we also have the domestic violence disclosure schemes, and then obviously all the work around domestic violence and coercive behaviour, which hasn't been progressed in Northern Ireland the way it should. Does that alarm you, Minister? And I suppose, what are you keen to do about it?
I suppose it alarms me in the sense that perhaps we haven't moved to this point, but then that means moving forward there's an opportunity to perhaps address it. And indeed, in addressing domestic violence, around that coercive behaviour or the other aspects of it, I'll be seeking the views of community and voluntary groups that work in relation to this, to other members who do have a specific interest, and to even indeed this committee and the sort of wider political interests around that. I'm a minister that is not here to bring my own baggage to the table. I'm very keen to be a representative of others, and that means the wider Northern Ireland, and the people who are informed on this issue will inform my policies moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Right out to members. Roy Beggs.
Thank you, Minister, for coming in front of us. It's good to have you here, and congratulations on your position. You mentioned the Fresh Start Agreement. And it has an important role to try and end paramilitarism and address organised crime in Northern Ireland, which are a major issue affecting communities. We've just received a letter from the National Crime Agency, who have advised that at request of the Northern Ireland Office they submitted a bid for Fresh Start funding to the Northern Ireland Office on the 30th of October 2015. And they identified 4 areas: civil recovery and tax, the National Crime Agency investigations, National Crime Agency tactical and strategic intelligence support, and forensic accounting. But following the submission of the bid, they've been advised that their bid was removed from the process as the position in relation to funding of Westminster bodies under Fresh Start was not fully confirmed. What was agreed, and why is this significant body, which can play an important role in addressing paramilitarism and organised crime, why were they invited to bid and then that request for funding removed, and they don't know where they are at present?
My understanding, and perhaps my officials keep me right in this, is that funding was subject to political agreement, and certainly I think the executive have committed 25 million of that, and as far as my understanding is that has already been committed within the justice realm. That other 25 million from the Treasury is again subject to moving forward in terms of the agreements, the political agreements.
Just to elaborate on what the Minister's saying, the bid from the NCA was put forward to the NIO during the talks for Fresh Start, but it didn't end up in the final Fresh Start agreement because there was a discussion about whether money allocated to Northern Ireland should be spent on Northern Ireland bodies and whether the UK agencies and law enforcement bodies should be directly funded by Her Majesty's Treasury. And that's where the confusion became. Of the money that was agreed within Fresh Start, which is 50 million, 25 million comes directly from the executive and 25 comes from HMT to the executive for executive priorities. And the question is, should the executive be funding a UK body? Should that not be directly funded by HMT to do the work within Northern Ireland?
Minister, would you not accept that there are areas of expertise that are in the National Crime Agency which do not exist in Northern Ireland?
Yes, of course I accept that.
Why are we not utilising them?
Because it's in terms of what we can do moving forward, and what's appropriate. But we will utilise those, and they are being utilised.
They are being utilised as we speak. I mean,
their bid wasn't successful.
Their bid was to enhance and to do more of, but that decision was between the NCA and the Northern Ireland office. Their bid didn't go through into the final discussions, is my understanding.
just amazed that the expertise has not been, would appear not to be fully utilised. Very disappointed.
Okay, Pam Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. Can I say, as one new member to one new minister, you're very welcome to this committee. I'm trying to get grips with all the issues that justice entails, and I'm sure it's been a major challenge for you. But I have to say, I do welcome your opening statements, and I welcome your positivity and your fresh eyes, I think the Chair called them, and your youthful eyes. So I think that's very positive, and it excites me for this mandate. And I really hope to see some change within justice. Can I just ask, the Chair touched on innovation, and you talked about the budget and the challenges to that and future challenges. Can you tell me, are there, or can you give more detail about key areas where innovation may be of help in regard to the budget?
Do you mean in respect of... do you mean like problem-solving justice, or?
Well,
Okay, more.
Or all of the above, I suppose. What, going forward, where you see innovation being good, I suppose, in doing things in a more timely manner, and more efficiently and more effectively.
Sure. Well, I think even perhaps legal aid's a good response to that particular one, and certainly it is building on the work of my predecessor. It's trying to make a more efficient, I suppose, legal aid in terms of the cost that because it is a costly service. For me, legal aid essentially is about ensuring that the most vulnerable within our society do have access to justice. Up until now, I think in terms of criminal fees, that's almost fully implemented, I think would be right to say. So we're moving forward in terms of the civil aspect of that, and we're starting with family law. David might maybe elaborate more on that one.
Yes, and the Legal Services Agency is one of the 16 by 16 Pathfinder projects for online services. So it's implementing a new IT platform which will allow citizens and lawyers to interact electronically. So that will be a much more effective system. And we were hearing in another committee yesterday that should give a lot more management information as well in real time about the flow of cases. Maybe another innovation is that the Northern Ireland criminal justice system has one of the best IT business platforms probably in Europe, called Causeway, and we're just starting the procurement of Causeway 2, which is going to be a more advanced version of this, but we have a system which has been transformed. All the information that would have been recorded by the different criminal justice agencies traditionally in paper is all now entered once and communicated electronically. So we have, say, a class-leading IT platform for criminal justice, and Causeway 2, which will come in at the beginning of 2019, take that further and involve more parts of the justice system. At the minute it includes police, forensics, public prosecution service, courts and the prison service, but we'll be broadening it to others. So an example of that is if you wanted to look up somebody's criminal record, it can be done in a matter of seconds now through the criminal record viewer, something that would have taken an administrative process much longer.
And I think just even from a wider perspective, when we do look at a more holistic approach in terms of justice and why people get into the criminal justice system, as I had mentioned earlier, particularly in relation to youth justice, if we can almost mitigate that from happening, then we're stopping people coming into the criminal justice system. And that, I think, overall, provides those efficiencies and savings, because we're just not utilising service, thankfully. So I think we need, as we take a wider aspect on it, as we work with other departments as well, I think there will be opportunities in that. So it really does come back to this outcomes-based approach that, as an executive, we're very keen to ensure moving forward. And it's something that we've argued about as years as an MLA that sat outside of the executive for years. I very much came up against that old silo working separate from one another. Moving forward, I don't think that's going to be the case. It's certainly not what we're trying to do. So.
That's welcome news, thank you. The second question I wanted to ask you about was just around the human trafficking legislation that went through and its now implementation. And you touched on, we talked about outcomes and the PFG and stuff. Have you any views so far as to how that implementation is going in regard to the legislation?
I'm not over the entire detail of that, but I did launch the Organised Crime Task Force strategy, and that would sort of have some connections with that as well. But I think it's about it's trying to intervene at that early stage, and I think 26 victims have been identified in terms of human trafficking within Northern Ireland. And I suppose whilst that's relatively small compared with other parts of the United Kingdom, it still demonstrates the fact that there are victims of human trafficking in Northern Ireland, and it's how we can best sort of help them get out of that vicious cycle. So perhaps, I don't know, Anthony, you want to provide more detail in terms of the...
Yes, in terms of just where we are, the latest statistics have actually moved on, and for the 15-16 year, there was actually 59 potential victims of human trafficking identified within Northern Ireland. They're mainly in the enforced labour side of the work, but there are also individuals who've been brought across for sexual exploitation as well. The scheme is working well. The connections between the PSNI, Immigration, Home Office and the protection schemes that we've put in place all seem to be working very well. But it is worrying in a society as small as Northern Ireland that those sorts of numbers are still coming through.
Okay, thank you. And finally, could I just ask on domestic violence? I know, Minister, you've already expressed that interest that I have as well in the whole subject, and we know it's a huge issue. And I know we have the publication of the strategy, which even in itself is probably a bit controversial, even in its title. When we talk about stopping, it's not really the most realistic of titles for a start off. But I know there's been for a long time a debate, especially amongst the voluntary community sector involved in domestic violence, about where domestic violence sits in government, because we have very much joint health and justice, but health has always been the lead, and we understand why that is, because of the outworkings of domestic violence. But are you content with that, with health being the lead on domestic violence, or do you think it should actually come under your remit of justice?
Yeah, I think it should be a joint working approach, because and I know you're familiar with this particular area. Domestic violence, involves, in a lot of cases, a family in it. It involves a social services side of things, but then, from my perspective as justice, it's how to then we deal with instances like that. And I think moving forward, and I alluded to it earlier a little bit in terms of problem-solving justice, so we're looking at maybe a more innovative way of trying to deal with victims of domestic violence. So that they are encouraged to come forward. They are supported, so that if they have to give evidence. So, for example, we have the court up in Derry that is specifically timetable set aside so that they are feel more comfortable when they're coming into to the court system. So. Again, it's one of these issues that I really don't think it can be down to either department, and certainly I've had a conversation with the Health Minister, and she's keen to really work with me on this and indeed other issues, which I'm really quite enamoured about. So I wouldn't say that I'd be disappointed that it sits with Health. I would be disappointed if Health wanted to do it on their own and they couldn't do it with me, but that's not the case. It's very much a case of this is collaborative working, and domestic violence is an example of where that needs to happen.
Yeah, I think the main thing for those groups that I mentioned is that I suppose that it's whatever issue under domestic violence is raised, it's not batted back and forward.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's where the joint up, working comes in, to give confidence to those on the ground actually that matters are being dealt with and not pushed about, pushed from side to side.
Yeah.
All I was going to say is that we did launch a joint strategy with health. So whilst health are lead in some areas, we're actually lead on the justice and protection areas. So we very much take that forward. So anything that comes through that side will have a very heavy justice lead on that. But it is a multi-agency approach, not just health and justice. It goes much wider than that into the voluntary and community sector as well, with Women's Aid and all the rest of those bodies. So we're very much trying to take a multi-agency approach to domestic violence as we go forward.
That's good to know, and I hope you'll encourage other departments as well, such as education as well, to play a role
Absolutely.
as well, because obviously there's a huge, and today we're having a briefing on coercive behaviour and how that affects domestic violence. But obviously there's a learning curve for all of us, but I think for our children especially in this digital age, that there are much more threats than there ever were before, certainly in my time. So I think if we could encourage other departments such as education to take a greater role and responsibility in educating and promoting the issues, that would be good.
I think very much so, and even outside of the departments, the various agencies too, the PSNI, I think they're running a campaign currently about is it walking on, if you're walking on eggshells. So it's it has to be that holistic approach, and it has to be joined up, and it's certainly something, it's as a ministerial priority, it's something I'm keen to drive forward, so I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, David McKierney.
Thanks, Paul, and you're very welcome. Good to see you here. I'm sure it'll be the first of many future encounters that we have together, Minister. Can I just make a couple of observations to begin with, but before offering some questions? First of all, I welcome your commitment to joined-up government and the remarks that you've made. Particularly, for the record, want to welcome your assertions in relation to civic engagement and your commitment to ensure that your portfolio attempts to maximise political inclusion right across the Assembly. I noted your comments in relation to the fallout from the Brexit decision. I would register real concerns for the implications of that in relation to the future direction of travel for the administration of justice and the development of legislation here in the 6 counties. But we'll revisit all of those issues in due course. But I do think it's important to mark it up as an issue of significant concern for us all. I said in an earlier meeting that I thought that we should work together to try and ensure that hallmarks of the next 5 years as a Justice Committee should be in relation to maximising access to justice and also having transformational impact from a justice perspective on our society here. And in that regard, I particularly welcome your comment to humanising justice, because I think that taking that approach, adopting that type of step change is actually key in relation to how we do maximise access to justice, but also ensure that it has transformational impacts, real, meaningful, tangible impacts at a community level and across society as a whole. So, insofar as your comments register a commitment to seeing change, then that's very much to be welcomed. Just to turn to a couple of questions. We had a Public Accounts Committee hearing yesterday, an inquiry into legal aid, and you'll be aware that from 2003 the Legal Services Agency accounts have been qualified, and we understand now that the Department's accounts are also qualified. That caused some alarm within the committee. I'm personally very vexed at the fact that since 2003 we've had qualified accounts within the Legal Services Agency. It's beyond me that that type of systemic problem should exist. But given that we now have qualified accounts for the Department, I wanted to ask you, Minister, do you have any concerns at this point in relation to governance arrangements within the overall Department?
I am going to pass this over to David if you wouldn't mind, Declan.
Well, as we discussed yesterday, Mr. Kearney, there's undoubtedly challenges facing legal aid as a governance environment, and you'd find exactly the same issue across the water. The Legal Services Agency accounts have been consistently qualified over issues such as fraud. But I hope that the committee, I'm not entirely convinced, but I hope the committee, Public Accounts Committee yesterday, took some measure of reassurance from the commitments by the Permanent Secretary to address both the strengthening of the counter-fraud arrangements within the Legal Services Agency and also the qualification in respect of forecasting. What we said then, just to recap, was that the introduction of standard fees is the best response to both of those challenges, because if there's a standard fee, the idea of supplier fraud is much reduced, and forecasting becomes a function of simply volume of cases. But we would acknowledge that it's unsatisfactory that the department's accounts are now qualified, and I hope you took some assurance from the Permanent Secretary's undertakings that he gave the Public Accounts Committee yesterday. But equally, I hope the committee noted the Northern Ireland Audit Office's observations about the significant progress made in respect of controlling and indeed reducing the cost of criminal legal aid, and our commitment to progress the same reforms in relation to family and civil legal aid.
That's noted. And in respect of all of that, Minister, could I ask yourself for an assurance that as that issue bottoms out, that we do not in fact see going forward any impediment in relation to access to justice for any section of our community, particularly in respect of legal aid as a vital tool to ensuring that sections of our society do have maximum access to justice?
Yeah, no, and again, I think I said that out when I discussed legal aid earlier. You know, for me, it should be a service that does provide that access to justice, for the most vulnerable within our society. So yes, I think I can give that assurance.
Thank you. The issue of domestic violence, coercive behaviour, sexual violence has been well enough registered by both Paul and Pam. It, I think, represents an issue of acute concern for the wider committee, and in that sense we certainly make common cause with your own commitment to seeing that issue addressed. You also mentioned in your remarks about adults with learning difficulties, young people with learning difficulties, young people with autism, ADHD being a particular issue of priority. It's an issue very close to my own heart. So I would be interested to know, in the context of interaction with DOJ, how would you see that issue of adults with learning difficulties and young people and those particularly affected by autism, ADHD, being addressed in the future?
Sure. It's a personal kind of interest of my own. To declare an interest, I sit on a board of a Compass Advocacy Network, which is a charity which promotes issues around adults with learning disabilities. And I suppose my experience on that would suggest that there are reasons over and above why people find themselves in situations that they wouldn't normally find themselves had they been given perhaps more support and guidance. But I think even just to add on to that, or in terms of what the department will do or what the department is currently doing, it's about engaging with the community and voluntary sector, and particularly in relation to those issues, and engaging with groups that would have a particular interest, where it is autism, where it is ADHD, or adults with learning disabilities, mental health too, might I add, because I think particularly in terms of women and into the criminal justice system, that mental health issues are quite prevalent, and a lot of women who are in prison probably shouldn't be in prison, based on that kind of perspective. So no, it's certainly when I form my priorities, and when we get this, I suppose, a more structured programme moving forward, it's something that I am keen to address. And the way I would approach things is to identify who the stakeholders are in this area and speak with them, and and particularly within the communities, because they will know why kids in particular, or adults with learning disabilities, or people with mental health issues, are finding themselves within the criminal justice system. And I think that can be mitigated, and it kind of comes back to the earlier conversation we had about the Youth Justice Agency, and almost trying to identify those issues before it gets to a point where they're already in the system and we failed them. So again, it will be working with health, it will be working with education, to ensure that we almost get there before they do.
Okay, that's very helpful. And going back to a question which was actually asked by Paul earlier in relation to the location of the Youth Justice Agency at present, I just want to register my own concern on that matter. One of the issues that came out of the Public Accounts Committee hearing yesterday was deep concerns around cultural mindsets as they impact on systems, undermine systems, or thwart effective systems coming into place. And I would be worried, and this is more an observation than a question for you, I would just be worried that you could have a situation where an effective cultural mission creep can then impact on the responsibility of the Youth Justice Agency as a direct result of where it fits within the architecture of the department. But my last question, if I may, Chair, is to ask, are you in a position to provide us with some update in relation to where we're at in terms of the Anne Orr's report recommendations from October 2011 in relation to the overall prison situation?
The vast majority of those recommendations have all been delivered. There's a few that are still in transit in terms of delivery because of the longer nature to actually take forward the implementation. But the Anne Orr's implementation group was set up and ran for a period of a number of years. And I think it had its last meeting a few months ago because the vast majority of everything had been delivered by that point.
How many more recommendations are left to be implemented?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but we can write to you and actually give you the breakdown of what has been implemented and what has been taken through. As I say, the vast majority of them have been taken through. Some of the ones that needed a much longer time frame in terms of change in culture, they're partially signed off, but the vast majority of them have been. But we will write to you and let you have that detail.
With a global status report in relation to implementation and what's extant?
Yes.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I think Kenneth Boyle.
Well, thank you, Chair. And again, Minister, I'd like to congratulate you on your new portfolio and wish you well in the future. Minister, just in light of the recent referendum outcome that you talked about earlier in your opening speech, and indeed in some places, not specifically here, there has been a renewed race hate campaign. What plans or discussions, Minister, are you having, or you plan to have, in ensuring that those responsible and that have a duty of care, as in the PSNI, to protect all of our citizens, particularly those from the ethnic minority backgrounds, to protect them from such crimes? So are you planning to have meetings with the PSNI?
And indeed, there has been engagement between the PSNI and my department on that particular issue. I don't think there has been as widespread issues as there has been in other parts of the United Kingdom, but there has been a couple of incidents that have been reported on over the weekend as such. But even beyond that, I think it's important that as an executive and indeed as a department that we put out that message that this is not going to be tolerated in any form. And indeed the First Minister had put out a statement to ensure that immigrants are made to feel welcome here, but even just the wider people who have already settled. So, and indeed from my department, I've been speaking with the junior ministers in terms of maybe reaching out and engaging with those particular communities as a way of reassuring them that this isn't acceptable. It's a wider societal issue that we have to start talking and you know, the Brexit debate doesn't change the fact that there are people here and they've made a life for themselves. And if there's anything that I can do to reassure that, then by all means it's something that we will.
That's very reassuring, and I welcome that. If you allow me, Chair, one more question. Again, and I suppose it's something that I'm also passionate about too, is the domestic abuse offence and disclosure scheme that we have here. And obviously the consultation closed on the 29th of April, and we look forward to hearing from your department in relation to the responses to the consultation. But obviously it's about changing the law and offering better protection to victims of domestic abuse and violence. And coming out of that piece of work, hopefully there will be more increased reporting of domestic violence and abuse. But Minister, would you be confident that we have the resources in terms of dealing with that increase in reporting, and also in terms of the frontline service, which again are those that are tasked to deal with these issues, which would be mainly the PSNI, who are obviously the protocol for any individual. Obviously they need the proper training and expertise on how to deal with the different elements within this scheme. So how does the department plan to deal with the PSNI in terms of their training and handling the increased reports and indeed victims of domestic violence?
I'll maybe ask Anthony, but I suppose just the general point. I'm not sure we do have the current resource in place to deal with that. Resource, I probably mean the expertise and the training, as you have alluded to. But certainly moving forward, if we're going to be serious about this, and I genuinely am really heartened that as a committee you seem to be quite unanimous in trying to tackle this issue, and certainly that's very helpful to me in terms of my priorities moving forward. But know that they have to be brought in, and it has to be done in the right way. And certainly I suppose I'd spoken earlier about the court and dairy and the sort of relationship with the Women's Aid up there, but it has to be much wider than that. And so whilst it can be the police, it can also be the community and voluntary sector, and trying to bring those people into it. Because again, I suppose victims of domestic violence do need that support. And sometimes they're not confident, with the police handling or dealing with it. So we do have to look at other alternatives in that respect, so that they can feel as comfortable as possible. I think any approach to domestic violence has to be very much centred around the victim, and it's about how we can best achieve that. But maybe Anthony can give you more detail in terms of the collaborative working with the police.
I mentioned the joint strategy that we had, and the fact that it is a joint strategy with health and ourselves primarily. We look after the justice and protection side of that, so that involves directly the PSNI as the lead, because it's usually people who suffer from domestic violence will actually go to a hospital or they'll go to the police. The increase in reporting is a good thing. It's not a sign that there's actually more domestic violence. It's the fact that we know the scourge has been on to report it for very, very many years. Victims afraid to come forward, victims afraid to actually challenge the perpetrator of these offences. So we have been working very, very closely with the police, also with Probation Board as well, and developing offender programmes to try and challenge the behaviour that they put forward. In terms of the police do actually, like ourselves, want to see an increase in reporting. We know they're there. They do attend those incidents as and when they are reported. All officers will tackle this as and when they meet it, but there are also specialist officers within the police specifically dedicated to tackling domestic violence, and the training for all new recruits in this area is quite intense, so that they see that from a very early stage of their cadetship right the way through.
Anthony, you'll understand when I say it'll not always be those, whenever it's first reported to the PSNI, it'll not always be that dedicated team
I
deal with the offence at the time. So I think it's important to get that right at the time, that those dealing with, should it be someone who is in a PSNI setting or in a hospital setting, that the PSNI dealing with the individual or individuals at that time have the expertise in dealing and how to handle the case across the board. And as I said, we're going to have different elements within the scheme, and it's important that they understand and know the elements and what to look out for and everything within that. So
absolutely, and that's why it's such a key part of the initial training of all police officers, because, a domestic violence, incident can happen in the middle of the street, someone walking along and simply punches, kicks or does something atrocious to another individual. The first police officer, the first responder, needs to be able to know how to handle that as well. So that training is part of all officers' core competencies, but there then are specialist units, as there are for many other aspects of police work, so that they will take the key lead in developing and approaching this going forward.
With the Chair's permission, can I just also mention next week, I think, sees publication of the OECD report on the work we've been doing here. And one of those, part of that is a report on the domestic violence court initiative in Derry that the Minister mentioned. And it's very encouraging, but it also says we need to make sure the police are quick to bring in people like Foyle Women's Aid and so forth, who have a support facility in place there. And to put in place an offender programme, because it's one thing to support the victim, but we need to address offending behaviour. So we're working with probation service to put that in place.
Are you finished?
Yeah.
Can I ask on that, how can a police officer be really fully trained in domestic violence when we do not have an offence of domestic violence?
We don't have a specific offence of domestic violence, but they're trained in handling domestic violence issues, and there are a range of existing laws that deal with attacks and abuse of another individual that they can use and take forward. But we are reviewing the need for a specific domestic violence offence, and that's part of the consultation process. But police can take this forward under existing law and deal with it under existing law.
Is there not a case, and I would put it to you, that and my experience of the Justice Committee and everything, PSNI, is that PSNI are scared of process. When you ask them about a new law, the first thing they'll say in most cases is that they can't enforce it, or in other words, they can't process it. They're scared of process, they're scared of what the funding implications will be, they're scared of all that, and they then become very negative, they turn their face away. I see that, maybe not on the ground, because individual officers will be very sympathetic to victims of domestic violence and coercive behaviour, but in an operational sense, in a machine, there's not much sympathy there at all.
I'm afraid I can't share that view. Sitting on some of these shared working groups, I can tell you that the PSNI, the representatives who come forward at very, very senior levels, are completely dedicated to increasing the amount of reporting of domestic violence and tackling domestic violence and making sure that each officer is equipped and delivers a sound approach to any victim of domestic violence going forward. Now, are there always going to be issues of funding and resources? Yes, that's undoubtedly true. But most certainly the police, from every level, from constable to chief constable, is very dedicated to eradicating this as far as we possibly can.
It's very hard to expect any victim of domestic violence or coercive behaviour, which is in many ways just as bad because of the coercive nature and the threatening nature and the use of violence at maybe an earlier stage. Very, very hard for someone to come forward, to testify, to give evidence, when we don't know in ourselves. We have no clear definition of what coercive behaviour is in Ireland. Suppose, is that something, Minister, you'd be keen to address?
And I think as a department we are looking to address that. But yes, of course, you know, if there is uncertainty there, whether that's a legislative a way of addressing it, perhaps it's a public awareness way of addressing it, then, you know, yes, it is. And, you know, certainly I've noted that this, and it's not just yourself that has raised it, Chair, but other members of the committee, and it has been raised to me outside of the committee as well. So yes, of course. Yeah.
Chair,
Do you want to come in?
sorry, just
Sorry,
Chair,
go on
just
ahead.
in terms of coercive behaviour, I mean, it has been identified. There have been new developments in GB on this, and that is part of the consultation process that has run to see how we should tackle this and take it forward. But fully with the Minister, we need to look at this, take it forward, and develop new approaches.
Can I ask, has the PSNI have they inputted to that consultation?
I can't say if they inputted directly, but they're part of the working groups that would look at all of this, that they're built in at every level in terms of this stuff.
Okay, Michael,
Chair,
you want to-
thank you for allowing me in again. Can I ask, and maybe it's not this department, but maybe the policing board or whatever, obviously if PSNI are getting training, there's something on paper to tell them what training is and what it's about. Is there any way we can get sight of that, exactly around the workings of the process in terms of working with someone who is a victim of domestic violence? What that training, what that piece of training looks like?
I can certainly ask the police to give me a synopsis of the sort of training they do
Yeah.
and handling of domestic violence, and I will ask them for that and send
Yeah.
that to you.
Okay, thank
Yeah, that'll be very interesting, and also then when that is actually part of their training, whether it's at the very start in their college days or whether that's an ongoing thing while they're operational. I think that'll be very, very important to know, to find out.
Chair, sorry, can I just declare an interest in that?
Okay, okay. Moving on then, Sammy Douglas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming, Mr Minister, and I wish you all the best, as everybody else has said. You have mentioned, a couple of the members have mentioned, in terms of recent referendum. I was looking up some stuff earlier, and according to the 1972 Act, which recognised the primacy of EU law over UK law, and since 1972, I think something like 101 out of 131 cases or actions have been lost by the UK, so it's very significant. So the reason why I put that in context, I was just going to ask you, what are your concerns, and what is your role in terms of where we're at the moment? I know things are very fluid at the moment in terms of the EU referendum, but obviously this is a big issue for us in terms of us moving forward as a community. Where do we stand now that we're heading out of Europe?
I suppose my concern always was between the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and I think, if anything, moving forward, for me it will be about ensuring the strongest relationship with our colleagues in the South, and indeed I met with Charlie Flanagan yesterday, and I reiterated that strength, because I think moving forward Ireland will play a significant role, albeit as a member state, and now moving forward the UK is likely to be out of that. So I think at this stage it's about ensuring those relationships. I suppose doing that scoping exercise to ensure what can happen moving forward. Are there provisions that, not being a member state, can we make use of, so that we can ensure, in terms of crime across the border, organised crime, that type of thing? David might be able to elaborate on that a bit more.
We've established, firstly, the head of the Civil Service has asked all departments to establish a Brexit unit, and Permanent Secretary of the Department of Justice is establishing a unit to advise and support the Minister on this. The Minister will have an early opportunity to discuss the criminal justice dimension of this at a meeting which had been arranged with the Irish Justice Minister in Taoiseach on Monday. But we're looking, and I've had some preliminary discussions last week in Dublin with Irish officials in the Department of Justice. We're looking at the criminal justice implications. They are principally about the range of criminal justice measures that facilitate effective justice cooperation, not only on the island of Ireland but with other member states, such as the use of the European arrest warrant, which has been a very effective mechanism, where we're hoping to pursue, we're analysing it, but we are understanding that a non-member state can still participate in that arrangement. We're looking at a range of issues, such as in the civil and family justice space, what would the world look like once the various directives no longer applied. So it's not as if there'll be nothing in place. There are things like the various Hague Conventions on mutual recognition of judgments and transferring of children and so forth to other jurisdictions. So there will be a corpus of law that's sort of below the EU level. But we will be trying as an early priority, and really it began with the Minister's discussions with the Secretary of State and First and Deputy First Ministers yesterday, to get a voice for the Northern Ireland justice sector at the table when the United Kingdom begins these negotiations, and obviously things like the common travel area will be significant. So criminal justice particularly has an interest in this. It's because of our common land border, and we'll be reporting in to the Minister and then through the Minister to the Executive.
Just one more question with a part B to it. I suppose I was on the previous committee here, and one of the most frustrating things being a member of this committee was that, although we had a very good relationship with the previous minister and the department, it was very frustrating at times when, in terms of cuts, now nobody wants cuts, but we understood that there had to be cuts. And it was very frustrating when the department came along and were proposing cuts to the likes of some of the community and voluntary sector, doing marvellous work. In fact, the chair raised one, and we got that overturned. That's why he's chair now. That was the rescue services. But also the likes of the probation board, doing amazing work, brilliant work, managing some of the most vilest of offenders in our communities, and we're cutting budgets now. So, Minister, can you give us assurance that from your own background, I know you've been involved in the community and voluntary sector, that you will work along with us to mitigate, to come against some of those cuts? And B, could I ask you, how do you see your relationship with this committee in the future?
Yes, of course I'll work along with you. It is a sector that I'm interested in. I more than see the value. I suppose to even to add executive weight behind that, it's something that the Programme for Government has specifically stated that we will try and look towards the community and voluntary sector, so it would be difficult to almost cut them off from that perspective. And B, as I said from the outset, I really want to have a good working relationship moving forward, and I do welcome the challenge. I might not be always able to answer your questions, but certainly we'll come back. And there's even today, I suppose there's points being raised that perhaps hadn't occurred to me, and we will take back and we will reflect, and we'll see if we can use that to strengthen any policies or decisions that we make moving forward.
Thank you very much. Thank
Okay,
you,
so, Trevor Long.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, you're very welcome. Wish you a fair wind as you tackle all these thorny problems. I wanted to go back to some of Declan's comments around the management of legal aid and the PAC hearing yesterday, because I don't like to cross swords with David at our first meeting, but I'm probably going to. The report from the audit office that we were looking at was pretty critical of the department's efforts over quite a number of years now to try and rein in the spiralling cost of legal aid. Now, I do accept that it's been perhaps stabilised to some extent, and I accept the remarks of David yesterday that matters are in train, which may have some effects. But the fact is that our legal aid bill and remuneration rates and so on is still wildly above what you'd compare it with across the water. And I've never been able to quite understand this stage in our progress why that should still be the case. It does seem to me at times that the legal profession tail is wagging the departmental dog to some extent in all this. And that do you think that from here in, under your control as a minister, that we may be able to actually do something about this, because it goes on forever and nothing ever happens. In the meantime, legal services agencies' accounts are being qualified year on year, and that's come through to the department as well. What could you say about this?
Through the Chair. No, I fully recognise what you're saying, and indeed my predecessor, I'm not sure he could have given you assurances that he would be able to tackle the legal aid bill, and perhaps this is why we are a case of deja vu. But I do think it does need to be addressed, and and we do need to look at the purpose of legal aid. And I've said it before, and I don't mean to keep repeating myself, but it is about ensuring that there is access to justice for the most vulnerable within our society. And we do need to look at cases that we are perhaps even referring to legal aid, and we need to look at, I suppose, even just the standard fees was one way in terms of tackling that. But no, you're right. Of course, you're right. We do need to address that. It's something that seems to be the reforms that have happened thus far perhaps don't seem to have had an impact on legal aid, but and whilst there might be a reason for that, there still needs to be more to be done. Can I give assurances as a minister? I'll try. Of course, I'll try, because if it's a huge bill, then it's impacting on my budget, and then it's impacting on other areas of my department, and that concerns me, because just to come back to even what Sammy had said, then we're going to end up with cuts elsewhere, and I wouldn't be prepared for that. So it's trying to have that overarching sense of what legal aid should be for, and how we can balance that in the wider budget of the department.
Yes, thanks for that. You did say there that the previous reforms, as proposed, and actually put through in law, don't seem to have had much effect. Well, I think part of the reason for that, at least, is I go back to what I said about the legal profession. I don't want to bear down too hard on the legal profession, but really, by the time the legal profession was finished with those reforms, they were diluted to such an extent as to be practically meaningless. And I can't help thinking this is liable to happen again. So I just hope that the department will be able to, I wouldn't like to say take on the legal profession, but certainly deal with them reasonably firmly and in a fair and equitable way.
I'll take your comments.
I have one more, Chair, I don't mind. I wanted to ask you about the rolling programme for closing courthouses, but Pam has whispered in my ear that there is a JR going on. So is there anything you can say about that at this time?
I can say that until that JR has reached its conclusion, I'm not closing any courthouses, but it would be inappropriate for me to comment further. Yeah, but no, it's fine.
Can I risk, for fear of risking something here, can I ask, but whilst there is that JR, that process going on, undoubtedly there'll be aspects and issues and pressures arrive at your desk, Minister, whereby you may see some example of a pilot scheme being launched somewhere.
Yeah.
Which then, an event in a population centre may need a premises or a courthouse or that matter.
Yeah.
Now, at that point, are you going to say, well, that would be a great place to put a pilot scheme, but we can't because we're going through a JR? Or will you be able to say, well, look, in the meantime, we will do this pilot scheme?
Of course, there are opportunities in the programme that we're hoping to take forward, and a lot of it does relate to that problem-solving justice, which I hope will have impacts around domestic violence, will have impacts around addiction, mental health perhaps as well, just in terms of my priorities moving forward. So yes, there are opportunities, and I will have, if trying to link this perhaps to the courthouses and the JR, I can't make comment on it, but everything will be considered after the conclusion of that.
Can I just say there's a very capable and willing Women's Aid Centre in Ballymena, and a very good population centre that would be open, I'm sure, to some sort of pilot scheme in the future with regards to domestic violence. So I'll just put that out there.
That's noted.
Just clarify one thing, Minister, just I know you say you can't talk about this, but help me out here. Is the judicial review in respect of only one courthouse, or is it?
I think there's three.
There are
Yeah.
three at the minute, but we decided to stop the programme. The Minister decided to stop the entire programme until we see the outcome of that.
Okay. Doug Beattie.
Chair, thank you very much. Congratulations, welcome, good luck.
Thank you.
I'm going to be kind of pointed, but I just want to go back to something that my colleague mentioned at the very start in regards to the NCA, because the answer you gave was very clear, certainly clear to us, but it doesn't seem to be clear to the NCA, because they say they're still talking to you to get clarity on the position. Could I ask, have they been given clarity? When were they given clarity on the position? And where do we actually stand and what that clarity was?
That was the position during the talks. Fresh Start was then implemented. We're still in discussions with them and with the NIO as to whether or not that money can be used for Whitehall funded departments, and also with Department of Finance, because there are certain rules within Department of Finance as well. I think the clear position is, if there is such a thing as a clear position, that if we require anybody to do anything on behalf of the executive, then that funding should be available to them. But there is the issue of, are they already resourced to do this work in this area, and therefore should that funding come from their current mechanisms, which is HM Treasury. So we're still working our way through that. We're working on the action plan to deal with the outcome of the three-person panel, and once we have that done, there will be some discussion about what are the priorities going forward and what will be funded going forward. So to answer your question in a very roundabout way, there's still some ambiguity.
So the NCA will be able to resubmit a bid if...
Well, they haven't submitted a bid to us at all at the moment. They submitted it to the NIO. But
yes,
certainly, yes, there might be some latitude in that. But as I say, we have to work through that with the Department of Finance, with the NIO as well.
Okay. Moving on to the next question, and again I'm going to be quite pointed. 2003, a direct rule minister decided we would have separated prison regime. It took him 12 days to decide that. He decided that against the subject matter experts, against the prison service and all other expert evidence. And we have lived with that regime ever since. It's created identity, structure, influence, and a focus for paramilitary and terrorist organisations. It has helped them direct terrorism, as we've seen in the death of two prison officers. And I think it has an effect on our society as a whole. And you know, everybody here and every party here has condemned the violence, you know, so this is not an attack on anybody at all here. But it does affect and it does influence our society, although it's confined within the prison. And I understand the reason for separated prison regime for the safety of prisoners, but I'm talking about the wider society here. Can I ask the Minister if she intends to have a review on the separated prison regime, and will she bring the findings to the Assembly and allow it to be finally debated?
I suppose really the response to that is the three-person panel report and how they intend to tackle ongoing paramilitaries. At this stage, we as a department, we're leading on the action plan to that report, and that does take into account, you know, maybe what you've discussed. So, you know, I suppose to answer your question, yes, we're addressing it, but it was done through the independent report of the recommendations that were put to it. And, you know, as an executive, we are minded to implement those recommendations as far as we can, and certainly the action plan that, you know, is work in progress. You know, we're very nearly there with it. Is positive in moving forward and doing that.
But we're still going to be sitting on a direct rule minister's decisions to give us this. Will we not get a chance to debate this in the Assembly?
Perhaps, you know, like by all means, use the mechanisms that are available to you within the Assembly to do that. But, you know, might I add, we are sitting on a lot of decisions that were made by people in the past. So it's how, you know, it's by how far we try to change that, or, you know, what's appropriate. But, you know, I understand.
Yeah. And moving on to that three-person panel, and I've got to say, you know, you've got your work cut out for you, because an awful lot of what they've thrown up in the three-person panel probably falls onto your shoulders eventually, directly or indirectly. And I'm just wondering what your views are on the funding for that, because having spoken to one of your department leads previously, they say that you have only bid for 1 million of the 10 million that's available. I'm just wondering if you believe that the PSNI, in their numbers, have the resilience to take on some of the recommendations, especially the one on the community policing.
Yeah, you're right. It's a comprehensive report, but I think what's legitimises that report, if that's the right word to use, is that it was an independent report drawn from three independent people, and it was recommendations that were put forward, so that the input has come from outside of the political sphere, if you like. And as an executive, we, as I said, we are minded to implement that report as much as we can. Probably, I would imagine most of those recommendations will be implemented moving forward. As a department, yes, a lot of the recommendations do fall to my department, but, you know, I am keen to stress that other departments will have an input in this as well. And indeed, when we circulated information to the departments, in fact, we worked quite closely in drafting this action plan along with the Executive Office and the other departments. The police have had sight of it. The other justice partners and agencies have had sight of it. But yes, there will need to be resource to make it work. I'm not quite sure where that figure of 1 million came from. Perhaps my officials could elaborate on that. But
where we are at the moment is the executive's first £5 million has been allocated and, has been freed for allocation, of which about £2.5 million has been allocated so far. Of that funding, if I run through it quickly, we have agreed a public awareness campaign for about £500,000. We've agreed specialist forensic equipment, which is about £500,000. Both of those would be directly within the department. We've looked at a feasibility study for a restorative justice centre, and that's about £60,000. And we've agreed a bid for £1.2 million for the police for specific aspects that they want to take forward at this point in time. What we're doing is most of the stuff that has been funded, with the exception of that element of the police, were issues that were already mentioned in the main Fresh Start document itself. So we funded those bits of it, and we were waiting to see what the three-person panel recommended and what the response to that would be before we allocated any further fundings going forward, so that we can make sure that we are actually targeting the priorities that were identified through that report.
And just it's nearly a personal opinion in many ways, Minister, if I may ask. The Patton report said we should have 7,500 police officers, and we're 6.9. We're about 600 officers short. And then if you take on that, we're missing about 80 officers, and then the sick on top of that. Do you think there's a resilience in our police force at the moment in numbers, or do you think we should be looking at increasing those numbers? Should we be reaching the Patton model? Or?
Obviously, that's an operational matter for the police, but I do take your point about community policing and about the people on the ground. And do we need more? I know over the years those figures have been cut back. Is that a good thing? I'm not quite sure it is. As a constituency MLA, people have raised that issue with me too. So on a personal level, then, could we have more community policing on the ground? Perhaps we could, but again, as I said, that's an operational matter for the police. And I think, to be fair to them as well, it has to come down to budget pressures as well, and what they can achieve through that. But it's a challenge. Yeah, I acknowledge that.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, Alex Howard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, and apologies. I'm dealing with a constituent case at the moment where she's overseas and some difficulty and a lot of phone calls back and forth. So I missed your opening statement and I missed some of your answers. So I'm going round old ground, then correct me. But could I start with this question about funding for the NCA? So the NCA confirmed that 8 months ago today, they submitted a request for funds. And they submitted that request for funds in the context of the situation last summer and thereafter. And here we are 8 months later, and not a penny of extra money has gone to the NCA to deal with any issues, including the issues raised by the panel report. 8 months and not 1 penny. Now, the official just said that you're beginning to release monies for various welcome initiatives. But is it not quite shocking that 8 months after the NCA were encouraged to bid for funding, and they were encouraged in a political context that time where people wanted more action to be dealt with, address organised crime, including the statement of the Secretary of State in Fresh Start, it also, the British Government commits to a concerted and enhanced effort, the document commits to a concerted and enhanced effort to combat organised and cross-border crime, which the UK Government will help to fund. But it doesn't seem fund the NCA to do it. Now, do you feel that you've got one hand tied behind your back when it comes to the panel report, when the NCA for 8 months hasn't been able to get a bean one way or the other to deal with the issue of organised crime beyond what it was already doing?
I don't really understand your comment about my hands being tied behind my back. Not really, because that money will be released. It's 20 25 million match funded by the executive, so 50 million altogether over the next 5 years, and 2.5 million of that has been already committed in terms of justice priorities. I understand that bid was a bid to the Northern Ireland office, so
If I can take that up, perhaps. First of all, the money for Fresh Start only became available from 1st of April this year onwards. Everything else was in discussion paper, but the money was to start from 1st of April 2016 forward. So there's that issue. There is match funding, £5 million, was £25 million over 5 years from both the executive and the Westminster government. We've sort of, as a shorthand, used £5 million a year each year. In saying that, we still haven't agreed what the profile will be with Treasury in terms of their match funding. But at the current point in time, that additional money from Whitehall has not been released, and it is subject to agreement about the action plan coming forward. So at the moment, the only money we have to work with is the executive's initial £5 million. We have allocated half of that so far in this year, and as I say, there are discussions between ourselves. We have a cross-departmental group set up to allocate the funding that is there. We have not received a bid from the NCA at this point in time. That, as I said, went directly during the initial discussions to the NIO, so we haven't received that. And there is a question mark about whether or not Whitehall sees that pot of 50 million covering Whitehall departments as well, and that's a discussion that we're having with NIO, as I say, and with the Department of Finance.
Like, my view is that if the NCA put forward a proposal in good faith and with some encouragement last October, then the British government should have been seen to respond to it. However, they responded to it, not getting into this issue about whether or not money under Fresh Start is or is not for Northern Ireland alone, or can be used for British agencies. The fact that not a penny has been given to them to do the work, I think is a matter of quite some significant concern. So let me ask you a second question, without getting into whether devolved money should be only for devolved work. Are London saying that there's any issue about their contribution to the £50 million being used to help the work of the NCA? Is there an issue? Is there some resistance in London for that being done?
As I say, we're still discussing this, we're still going through it. I think the
I understand.
NIO position would be that that money is available to the NCA. We have to sort out whether money for the executive can be spent on UK bodies, and that's one of the issues that we have to go forward with. So there is still some issue, but just to say, at this point in time, we haven't funded a lot of bids that could have possibly come in, simply because we wanted to see the outworking of the three-person panel to make sure that the money that we do spend, and it is only at most £10 million a year, is actually funded to the bits that were prioritised within that report. So we wouldn't have leaped into funding and giving away £2, £3 or £4 million at this point for year on year until we've agreed with the executive what the priorities should be.
The only two other observations to make about that particular point is that, Chair, I do find it unacceptable that, given the threat of organised crime in the north and the island of Ireland, and given the various initiatives taken by the Irish government before and since Fresh Start, that the British government still hasn't found any extra money for the NCA in 8 months. But whatever about Fresh Start monies, they haven't found a bean for the NCA in 8 months. So let me ask you a question, Minister. Given that you're about to conclude your response to the panel report and the executive, will that be before the summer recess or before the last executive meeting of this summer, before people go off on their holidays? And will this issue have the NCA getting extra money be resolved by then? Because it doesn't seem to be resolved very quickly so far.
To answer your first question, the conclusion of not conclusion, but the beginning really of the action plan, we hope to actually have that in the coming weeks, and we would hope to have signed off on that in the coming weeks. Recess is now Friday, so it's not going to happen before then. But the executive won't necessarily be taking their holidays. It might be a case that if we have to meet, we will, and particularly in the context of the Brexit campaign. So it will be signed off in the coming weeks. I'm confident of that. In terms of the NCA, again, that's a question for the British government. I suppose for us in Fresh Start and moving that forward and funding the action plan, that's something that we will provide a focus on. And
Well, no doubt we'll come back to that, and I'm encouraged that the executive might be thinking of meeting more regularly over the summer than has heretofore been the case. I don't know if the issue of inquest was touched upon, Chair. So yesterday, the Ballymurphy massacre families were outside this building, and today, families who suffered at the hands of the Glenanne gang were outside the Royal Courts of Justice, and both of them are making the point about funding for inquests. So, in the Assembly, at your question time recently, you confirmed that you've been discussing it with FM and DFM and executive colleagues, that it was a matter of urgency, and that you were confident that sooner rather than later the matter would be dealt with. So, in the last 2 weeks, is it sooner or is it later?
I think it's sooner. I do think there will be a solution to this. By all means, it's discussions between the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister and myself. But as I suppose I put on record at my question time, I would be keen to see this progressed, because I suppose one way or another these legacy inquests are going to happen. I would rather that it happens within the next 5 years as proposed by the Lord Chief Justice, rather than making it longer and prolonging that suffering for the families. And I do acknowledge that that's the case. But in discussions that I've had with the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, I do feel it will be dealt with sooner rather than later.
Well, sooner needs to be before September, because that's when the next High Court term starts, and that's when the Lord Chief Justice and Justice Colton and Justice Weir, Lord Justice Weir, were going to get on with the work. So we're 8 weeks from when, 8 or 9 weeks from when the Coroner's Court, the Lord Chief Justice and the Coroner's Court want to get on with this work. Given that that has to be the time frame for sooner, are you confident that that time frame will be met?
I'm confident that it will be dealt with sooner rather than later. I can't put a date on it because I'm not representing the First Minister and Deputy First Minister on this. I'm here representing the Justice Minister. But if I can give you an assurance, it's something that I am keen to progress.
But in your view, and as the advice that you're given to the executive, given the timetable that the High Court is working to, that sooner must be a decision and a drawdown of funds before September of this year.
I would be confident that they're fully aware of the implications of this.
But is that the advice that you're giving before September?
Yes, I have spoken with them and I have said that this needs to happen as soon as it can.
Before September this year?
I haven't held them to date with that, what I don't intend to do.
I would encourage you to do that, because otherwise the timetable of the Lord Chief Justice is properly. And as the families outside the High Court this morning and outside this building yesterday confirm, that can't be put in jeopardy.
I agree with you.
Can I ask you then a third question? Has the British government, has the Secretary of State been in contact with you about where she plans to go or not go in terms of moving on legacy negotiations?
In respect of the legacy inquests or beyond
legacy
that?
Generally, so
where
things were left in the empty paragraphs of Fresh Start. Has she indicated to you?
Yeah, she has, and I get a sense again that from her perspective there is a sense that they want to move that forward as well. I didn't go into much detail, admit, but I do get an assurance that there is a sense that we need to move that on as soon as we can.
So I would agree the ambition to move it on as quickly as you can, as long as we move it on in the right way,
Yes, of course.
and not in a partial and selective way, which is clearly going to be the risk. But has she indicated to you what that means, moving it on? Because her political lifetime in our office mightn't be that long. Might be up until September, based upon some speculation. And some of us are concerned that that time frame, which is a political one for her, may actually run contrary to getting the right outcome in terms of legacy. Has she said what she plans to do, let's say, over the next couple of months?
There's been no indication that we're facing a new Secretary of State or not. If that's the case, I imagine the office will have a subsequent person to take those issues on. So, but by all means, I think that's where our responsibility comes in, to ensure that there is some sort of consistency moving forward. But no, I haven't had discussions about what Teresa Vilder's future is with her. I don't think that was appropriate. So.
Well, it wasn't suggested she should, but as the future of legacy, that I think you should have some discussions.
Yeah, but the future of legacy will be part of the future. Whether whoever part of that is not really my concern. It's about moving it forward in the right way.
Your predecessor was quite pivotal in the Fresh Start negotiations, because obviously Justice had very significant responsibilities. They were engaging with NIO officials, they were working at documents, they produced documents, and so on and so forth. Is there any work being done at official level between your officials and NIO officials in respect of any future draft legislation in respect to legacy?
Yes, and I acknowledge too that my predecessor was pivotal, and I too will be just as pivotal, if not more. But yes, of course, there's those conversations. These are key stakeholders and something that's very important to Northern Ireland. So there are conversations with the Northern Ireland office, with the executive office, the wider executive, other agencies.
Is there any current discussions between your officials and NIO officials in respect of the content of legacy legislation to go forward in Westminster? Or are those suspended at the moment?
There are discussions going on currently about how the initiatives on the past that were omitted from the Fresh Start agreement can be progressed, including the possible legislative responses, and also a revision of the funding bid, which you asked me about when I was last before this committee. So that work is being progressed at official level at the moment, in anticipation of ministers indicated of some attempt to move matters forward sooner rather than later.
Do you lead in that work for the department, David, or who does?
I'm responsible for the any legislative response and the legacy inquest aspect of it. And Anthony will be responsible for actually the operationalising of, say, the HIU, if it is to be established, or when it is to be established. So I do the legislation and the planning, and Anthony does the implementation. So it's falling to my officials at the minute, principally.
Well, the reason the first question was to find out what was going on, and clearly, and I think there should be conversations going on, and conversations at the political level going on to some degree as well. It would be useful, though, Chair, to get some sort of written brief about the broad outline of what those conversations are about between NIO and DOJ officials. I'd ask the Minister to provide that to the committee, if that's the committee's wish. Okay. Can I ask just a couple of further questions? Have you met the CJI since your appointment in respect of the reports into...
I have.
And are you in a position to share your thinking in terms of their work and the strong recommendations that they made? And whilst the first report was quite negative, and they came here, I think, in March, and were affirmative, as was the Director General of the Prison Service. What's your sense of that issue?
I very much welcome the work of the CJI in terms of that particular report, but and of course other reports. You're right to say that was a very negative first report, but I am content that the follow-up to that was that the situation had stabilised within Maghaberry, and hopefully we can build on that moving forward, and it certainly seems to be the case. But yes, we do need to look at that, and we do need to look at the recommendations from that and seeing how we can implement them.
And you fully support all the recommendations?
I certainly support the work of the CJI and what he has recommended, and we will be of mind to implement them as far as we can.
I think you should be fully endorsing these recommendations. And a number of times today, and I understand why you're saying it, because you've said that you will implement as far as we can. I think the standard should be to implement fully, and to explain why it can't be the case that it's fully. But I do think the position of the Department and the Minister should be to fully implement those recommendations, because they were contested, let's be honest about it, and there were some conflicts within the committee in that regard. Mr. Frew, the Chair, will remember that. I only came on the committee late on, and I certainly remember it. So I do think there's an issue there. And my final question is, since your appointment, have you met the head of the security service in the north?
Not sure. No. Monday.
This Monday coming. Would you be disturbed if the recruitment of agents in the north was at a different threshold by the security service than it was by PSNI, who might have higher thresholds? I mean, who they recruit and what agents are not allowed to do as agents of the security service. Would you be concerned if the standards were different and the standards of PSNI recruitment were higher?
I'm not in a position to answer that, Mr. Allen.
I do think it is an important issue. Okay. I think it's an issue you might want to think about and, if necessary, raise with the head of the security service in the north.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Alex. And Roy, you want to come in and quick
Just a brief bit about the funding of the National Crime Agency, or the lack of additional funding for it to date. Can you just clarify, is this essentially an accountancy spat between the Treasury and the Executive, or is the Executive refusing to fund the National Crime Agency for additional work that needs done here?
As I say, we haven't had a bid from the NCA to the cross-departmental group that's looking at this at the moment. As I said, the initial bid that they put in was to the NIO during the original discussions of Fresh Start, not since the Fresh Start agreement was actually produced. So there isn't currently a bid before the committee or the group that I chair from the NCA to take that forward. It is more than an accountancy issue. There's a real issue here about whether or not the Executive should be funding the work of HMG body, and that is an issue that we're still discussing and looking to see whether or not those monies that were agreed within Fresh Start encompassed all law enforcement agencies or Executive agencies.
But nevertheless, the National Crime Agency has particular skills which we don't have here, and the money has originally come from Westminster. Should we not be using all skills that are needed? I think urgent decisions are needed.
Okay, can I ask one question on that? Obviously this has been invited, this bid by NCA to NIO has been invited sometime late last year. Are we aware of any other bids from any other agencies, law enforcement agencies, to the NIO? And I completely understand that they haven't come to you, Minister, or the Department, but are we aware of any MI5, MI6, any other bids that have actually come in to... It seems strange that NIO has simply requested a trawl of bids for funding, Fresh Start, whenever they weren't really in a capacitive state at that time to actually...
My understanding was when the parties were hothousing to discuss Fresh Start, there was a range of issues asked. How could we tackle this? What would be involved? What could we do? And different bodies at different times were suggesting, well, we could do this. The PSNI were talking to us. The UK bodies were talking through the NIO. My understanding is that the NCA made a bid for funding to the NIO. I'm not aware of any other bodies, such as Customs and Revenue, etc., who did, but that's the position I know.
Okay. Listen, this has been a marathon session for you, Minister. Thank you very much. I give everyone latitude there today because it was very important. It's your first time here at the committee, and I hope it's been very informative for you. It's certainly been very informative for us. And we wish you all the very best, especially, Minister, moving forward. And just to reinforce we're here to scrutinise, but we're here also to support and advise you as you go along this journey, and again, we're all here to make the world better, so hopefully we'll be able to achieve that.
Yep,
So again, thank you very much.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Okay, members, we all push on. We are struggling for time here, and again, I did give everybody latitude there because of. Sorry, Alex.
I appreciate that, but to get some written briefing from the department in relation to the character of the discussion between officials in the NIO and the DOJ on the outstanding legacy matters.
Okay. Have enough questions on that? Got that? Okay. Happy enough to pursue that, members, are we? Content? Yep. Okay, then moving on then. Agenda item number 5 is a briefing on coercive control and domestic violence. Can I advise members that Professor Evan Stark will attend the meeting to brief the committee on coercive control and domestic violence? Professor Stark is a leading global expert on coercive control in the context of domestic violence and abuse, and has acted as an advisor to the English, Welsh and Scottish governments in the development of their coercive control laws. The relevant papers are at pages 125 to 164 of the meeting pack. Can I welcome Professor Stark to the meeting? You're very welcome here, Professor. And can I advise you that this session is being recorded by Hansard, and the transcript will be published on the committee web page in due course. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Professor, to make an opening statement, and then we'll have questions if you don't mind.
Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to hear the Justice Minister's testimony. I brought a PowerPoint just for my support, basically, and as a crutch, because my memory isn't as good as it once was. I know some papers have been distributed that I've done, and so I'll take that. I assume most of you have not had a chance to read them, but I'll take that as a written testimony, more or less, so that it's in the record. And we'll certainly be more than willing to submit any additional testimony that you find might be useful. Just trying to get up those PowerPoints that I had. What I thought would be most helpful, and particularly in light of Mr. Frew's comments and questions, is to provide some background on the new offence in England and in Wales, and what we expect to be the new offence within the next couple of months in Scotland. All of which, well, the one in England and Wales obviously similar. Wales has complemented the new offence, as you may know or not, with a bill called the Wales Bill, which is a prevention agenda, and we can certainly talk about that if you want. The question was raised during the discussion with the Justice Minister about police training and guidelines for police training, and I would certainly welcome, if there's time, questions about what the implications are of the new offence for police training. I will say that the College of Policing in London has issued guidance for the implementation of the new offence of domestic violence and coercive control. And I think these are superb, both for police and for CPS. I don't know if there are comparable guidelines for the judiciary as yet, but certainly this guidance is quite good. And I would certainly, I think I have links to that guidance, those guidance papers in the documents I submitted. So I would certainly recommend that anyone who's interested in following that through should do so. We can also talk, if you're interested, in what the implications are of the new offence for the current arrangement in Northern Ireland, particularly the organisation of the Marrocks, the organisation of the new Justice Centre, the Consolidated Court in Derry, or any of the other reforms that have been implemented. But with respect to time, what I thought I'd do just in my comments is give you a little background on why we're introducing the new offence, what led us to it, and something about the elements of coercive control that we now believe comprise anywhere from 60 to probably more realistically 80% of all of the cases of partner abuse that police are involved with, that we're seeing in the refuges or we're seeing in the courts. And so basically the background should be understood, I think, this way. First of all, and I won't, unless you really want, in response to direct questions, to ask about it, I won't discuss the specific political dynamics that led the Home Secretary either to hold the initial consultation that led to the new definition in England, or to bring that out through the Solicitor General, Mr. Buckland, into the Parliament as a new offence. I mean, these were complicated negotiations and dynamics, as you can imagine, but I would be happy to discuss the particulars of those dynamics if you're interested. But I think the first thing that I just want to put on the table, and I think as background, is the fact that our general assessment, and I think the agreement throughout Europe and in fact most of the world, is that an approach to partner abuse that was based on the equation of that abuse with individual acts of violence was completely inadequate, both in the sense that it didn't reflect the actual experience of the people who were suffering this abuse and the perpetrators of that abuse, but also inadequate because it was not leading in the form of intervention to any kind of cost-effective strategy. That is, any strategy that produced either the justice outcomes that we intend our police and our justice system to produce and have a right to expect, nor was it producing the outcomes in terms of reduced levels of violence and abuse in our community. And so I just, if you don't know, I certainly should say that every country now, including Northern Ireland in its executive definition, every country now has expanded its definition of partner abuse from domestic violence to include this broad pattern, which I call, and England now calls, coercive control. Scotland is going to call coercion and control. Various names are used for it. The Council of Europe doesn't refer to it specifically as coercion and control, but uses virtually the identical definition that Northern Ireland uses in its executive strategy, that Scotland used in its executive strategy, and so forth. And this definition, broadly construed, includes, in addition to physical violence, sexual violence and sexual coercion, patterns of isolation and intimidation, and most problematically, from the standpoint, from an evidentiary standpoint, patterns of control. Namely, patterns in which there's exploitation, deprivation, regulation of people's behavior, what the Council of Europe refers to in the Istanbul Convention of 2011 as arbitrary violations of liberty. And we'll talk about some of the issues involved with that, and if you want, again, the 4 cases that have been brought, 1 in Magistrates' Court and 3 in the High Court, and which have resulted in England in progressively harsh sentences, not, in my view, still where they belong, but nonetheless, the first was 18 days suspended, the second was 6 months, the third was 2.5 years, and last week an offender was sentenced to 3.5 years for domestic violence and coercive control. I think those of you who are familiar at all with the issue will recognize that that is extraordinarily different than the vast majority of dispositions of these cases, which result in either no conviction at all, or even if there is a conviction, no punishment, certainly no jail time. And I can talk about the data on that if you wish. But essentially, the condition in England was that somewhere around 3.8% of every 100 reported cases of domestic abuse was resulting in a conviction, and the typical conviction the typical punishment in those cases was a fine. And we were finding the same rate of attrition, a 97% rate of attrition in reported cases of rape, partner rape. That is to say, for every 100 reported partner rapes in England, roughly 3 was resulting in a conviction, and almost always for the lower offense of domestic violence. So in any case, for the first piece of what I really want to put on the table is that the offense was not, the way in which we were responding was not working. Virtually no one was going to jail. Police were using enormous amounts of resources. Britain was expending more money on domestic violence intervention than on defense, and there was absolutely no evidence, not a shred of evidence, that we were having a significant impact in reducing the numbers of victims in our community. Now, I don't mean to say that we haven't made enormous progress in the 40 or 50 years that I've been involved in the issue. We have, absolutely. Specialized police units, you know all of the gains that we've made, the focused courts, the enormous amount of help that Women's Aid has provided. We've undoubtedly saved thousands of lives, and certainly in the short run protected probably several million women and children in the 30 or 40 years that these reforms have been in play. Nonetheless, the fact remains that we haven't had a major impact, according to the British Crime Survey and according to other researchers in the United Kingdom on the basic problem. We can talk about differences in reporting between Northern Ireland and other countries in the United Kingdom, but the reality is that throughout the United Kingdom, reporting rates were very, very low. In part, I think, because, as Mr. Frew observed, because there was no domestic violence offense, and even though there were punishment, or there was arrest in cases that had the components of violence in a partner relationship, or the victims themselves and the community as a whole didn't perceive this as a serious offense. And I was heartened to hear the observation that police in Northern Ireland actually see an increase in reporting as a welcome sign of trusting the police, and particularly in light of the peace process and what went on before. Another indication that current approaches were not working, and a very important source, by the way, of support both in Scotland and in England, was the fact that police found themselves returning again and again to the same homes, arresting the same offenders, and exhausting enormous amounts of police resources, again, without producing the justice outcomes that we would expect and hope would be produced. And the offenders who committed 50 offenses were no more likely, enormous research supports this conclusion, were no more likely to be punished on the 50th offense than on the first. They were no more likely to be punished if they committed 50 offenses than they did one. And somewhere around 60% of the police caseload, and we don't have the exact data for Northern Ireland, but I have no reason to believe it's any different, 60% of the police caseload was taken up with these repeat offenders. The other thing that I think you should be aware of is that the definition of the equation of abuse with a set of crimes that were related to isolated acts of assault or harassment meant that each act was considered separately. Now, it may seem commonsensical that the more serious the violence, the more likely there is to be an injury, or the more serious the injury, that's the more serious domestic violence case. We actually know that this is not right. That we understand now, after years of research, that the risk in domestic violence cases and the aggregate harm in these cases and the classic pattern that these cases follow is actually defined, even when we limit ourselves just to physical abuse, to the frequency and duration of the physical violence rather than to the severity and the injurious potential of that violence. In fact, somewhere between 95 and 98% of all the physical abuse that police are called to respond to, or the courts see, or we see in refuge, is trivial from a medical or criminal justice system point of view. What I mean by trivial is not that we'd want it done to ourselves, but I mean it involves pushes, shoves, slaps, chokes, kicks, punches, not something, not something that's going to impress a police officer or an emergency medical doctor. And in fact, that's what the evidence shows. It shows that when police respond in 95 to 97% of the cases, there is effectively, even when there is an arrest, which has become commonplace over the last decade, no effective consequence for the perpetrator. So the first thing we've done is we've recognized that the frequency and duration of the violence, these patterns last for an average of 5.5 to 7.2 years. Many women who present to us, somewhere around 40%, are presenting cases in which their physical abuse is 2 and 3 times a week over this period. So we're talking about people who have experienced, even though minor, on an individual level, hundreds, sometimes thousands of these separate assaultive events. And the significance of those events, again, is not a function of their injurious outcomes, but the cumulative effect of experiencing this pattern of largely routine, low-level abuse over a significant period of time. And as I indicated, insofar as we responded, and this is one big point I want you to take away from what I have to say, because it's one of the most important in understanding the rationale for a new offense, that insofar as we responded to each of these as a separate crime, considered them from through the prism of assault or harassment crimes, because 97% of those crimes or those acts were relatively trivial, essentially there was no effective intervention at all. So the first thing a new offense has done, and Anne-Marie Hicks, the Chief Procurator Fiscal for Domestic Violence in Scotland, has taken on, even without a redefined offense, is to see historical abuse, that is the repetitive nature of the violence involved, in itself as a course of conduct that merits a vigorous community response. And that is the foundation of the coercive control offense, the first foundation, the recognition that violence is typically frequent, that its significance lies in its duration and its cumulative effect and the cumulative harms of living with this violence, and that therefore an incident-specific approach will not adequately deal with that abuse, and nor does it deal with the severity of the entrapment that is occasioned by being subjected to that kind of pattern abuse. The second element that I think was critically important to us was the realization that the sexual offenses that were so commonly committed in this context were not being acknowledged at all, either by our law or by any of the instruments, the risk instruments, or the understanding of definitions of partner abuse that were put into practice. Somewhere over a third of the women in our caseloads, and we're talking now, when I say our caseloads, I mean the cases seen by the police, the cases seen in the courts. You just assume these are people reaching out for help. And we also have data from the population, general population studies to support this. Somewhere around 34% of these women have been raped in the context of ongoing abuse. In England, in Scotland, in Wales, though not interestingly in Northern Ireland, according to the official statistics, partner rape is far and away the most common form of rape reported to the police. More common, in fact, than acquaintance rape. Now, in Northern Ireland, apparently, the reported rapes to the police by partners is around 12–13%. But in England and Scotland, in the United States and Wales, it's 3 times to 4 times that. And we know that these rapes by partners are dramatically underreported, much more underreported than stranger rapes or any other rapes. If you don't know the comparative figures, the likelihood that a partner will sexually assault a woman is somewhere between 5, 10, and 15 times the probability that she will be assaulted by a stranger. And yet, these sexual assaults, which are typically repeated, were not included in our offense understanding. In fact, quite the contrary. I indicated that the attrition rate in terms of partner rapes in England was about 97%. Why is that? Well, the reason appears to be threefold. First, many of these women withdraw their complaints after they bring them. Secondly, many of these women have reported multiple sexual assaults, and therefore their credibility as witnesses is less. Thirdly, many of these women present with secondary psychosocial or behavioral problems like alcohol or drug abuse or depression or suicidality or what have you. Again, factors which lower their credibility as witnesses and make it more likely that police will not pursue and prosecutors will not press charges of sexual assault. But I hope you're thinking a little bit ahead of me and recognize that if an assailant is still in the community, let alone still in the house, that it's very likely that the victim in that rape, who has reported that rape, is going to withdraw her charges and not pursue, given the risk. Secondly, I hope you anticipate that if someone is assaulted multiple times, that makes the case more severe if that occurs, sexually assaulted, if that occurs in the context of an ongoing abusive relationship. It means she's still at risk for even more assaults, and yet that is another factor, which in the old definition, the domestic violence understanding of abuse in relationship to assault, is essentially discounted. And finally, we have data from my own research at Yale and from research by others that the vast, vast majority of these secondary behavioral and psychosocial problems that undermine a woman's credibility as a witness on these sexual assault cases is a consequence of the abuse, not the cause. In other words, it has developed as a way to manage and in response to this ongoing abuse. So the second problem we were having, in addition to the failure to address the frequent ongoing pattern of physical violence, was that no one was addressing the pattern of sexual assault. And the sexual assault, it turned out, was occurring on a continuum of sexual coercion, which extended to reproductive coercion, forced pregnancies, forced abortions, all kinds of controlled sabotage of birth control, and to myriad other forms of sexual coercion, extending to what I call rape as routine, where a woman complies because there's such a threat leveled at her that if she doesn't comply, the consequences are worse. Not technically sexual assault, but nonetheless, it's part of this pattern of coercion. What we found was happening in terms of the police response, both to violence and to rape, was that as police responded again and again to these families, seeing the same men and the same women week after week, sometimes over months, sometimes over several years, as these families became well known to them, they often began to withdraw from the family. They began to find ways to deal with the frustration they had about this revolving door by either blaming victims for what was going on or simply increasingly responding in a perfunctory way precisely as these cases got more serious. Now, I don't want to single out the police. All of us did that in the system. The refuge system did it. The social work system did it. As they would see the same victims repeatedly and the same perpetrators remained at large about whom nothing was done, the entire focus of the system had to be on sustaining women's safety. But that focus was itself a function of the fact that these chronic offenders were still at large. I don't know if that makes sense, but we can talk about that in more detail. The third element that we uncovered of coercive control that wasn't identified with the offense and wasn't seen as, officially was a pattern of intimidation. Northern Ireland has very clearly identified certain types of intimidation as a cause of great concern. But the forms of intimidation that are used in abusive relationships, in 80% now, 60 to 80% of all the cases we're seeing, start with literal threats that run the gamut: threats to kill, threats to animals, threats to children, threats against neighbors, co-workers, and what have you. They run the gamut from those threats to threats that are so subtle that they appear to outsiders as almost loving. I'll give you an example. One of my clients is a pitcher in a baseball league, a factory baseball league, and her boyfriend comes to the games And because they have a rule that she won't make me jealous, when he sees her striking out 5 or 6 batters in a row, he begins to feel that sense, nobody loves me, why are they paying attention to her? So he comes out onto the field and he offers her her sweatshirt and says, darling, you're cold. Here's your sweatshirt. Again, this is something that appears loving to her teammates, whose, you know, their partners are off drinking or out with other women, carousing or whatever they're doing. But she understands that if she doesn't cover up her arms that night, there are going to be real consequences. That's his message. So when we talk about intimidation tactics, we're talking about tactics that run the gamut and are present in multiple forms in all of these relationships. Virtually all of the compliance we see in abusive homes is driven by the or else proviso. Either you comply or else. Either you do this or else. Intimidation probably rests most heavily on a pattern of criminal behavior that is still not officially recognized in Northern Ireland and was imperfectly recognized in the rest of the United Kingdom, namely stalking. What we know now is that the vast majority of stalking behavior is by partners, that in 57% of these cases of stalking, the stalking begins while the couple is still together. This was not even covered, this form of stalking was not even covered by England's stalking law, and was the official rationale, this lack of coverage, that Robert Buckland used, the Solicitor General, when he introduced the new offense, because that was the gap in the old law. 56, and we now know, too, that stalking has the most dramatic effects on a victim's psychology and future well-being, even more so than physical violence, because of the unknown threat, the possibility may happen at any time, and is one of the highest risk factors for eventual homicide and serious injury. Again, not included in the partner abuse offense, and even when it was, not recognized as something whose main prevalence occurred while the relationship was still together. And finally, alongside the, well, I don't know how many of you listen to the Archers. There's another dimension that the Archers have put on, and, you know, we've talked a lot. I don't know how it's going to end, so I can't give you any clues. But the Archers have publicized another element of coercive control, namely the gaslight games and the psychological abuse that is so characteristic of these this pattern of relationships. Now again, these gaslight games, you know, making somebody feel like they're crazy, turning off the stove after she thought she turned it on, moving a car, knowing where she is at all times, you know, what have you, and then showing up unexpectedly, and she doesn't have any idea whether you can read her mind or why. These gaslight games, even the insults that go along with them, are not in themselves coercive control. What makes them so devastating in these families, in these relationships, is the or else proviso, is that they occur in a context where she cannot respond. She cannot react without risking physical and other forms of harm to herself and others in her network. So the psychological abuse and all of the other forms of degradation that accompany it are devastating in part because the usual response, which is simply to walk away, to get a divorce, to laugh, you know, at the insult, is not available because of the threats. And finally, the major new component that is embedded in the new offense, and about which we were doing virtually nothing, is the fact that in these relationships, even in relationships where there is no physical abuse, and in about 25% of the cases we're seeing all of the effects of entrapment and battering without any physical abuse, even when there's no physical abuse, the major dynamic in these abusive relationships is a pattern of control, which is effectively characterized by exploitation, taking her money, treating her like a servant. When I say like a servant, I don't mean having her do the dishes and clean the house. I mean literally fostering almost an indentured servitude situation that you would expect to find in a prisoner of war camp rather than in a family living next door. So we're talking about forced servitude. And if you read the cases that have been taken so far to court, you will see evidence presented for the first time in a UK court of this kind of indentured servitude within the context of a family relationship. In addition to exploitation, control includes patterns of deprivation. 55% of the men who we are arresting are themselves telling us that they have taken their partner's money, that they have limited her movement, that they are not letting her drive a car. Something like 60% of the women we see in refuge in the UK are telling us that they are experiencing these deprivations of basic movement, of basic access to things they need for themselves and their children for survival, that they are experiencing it often or all the time. So that is the second dimension, incredibly important when we're trying to train judges to understand, quote, why women stay in these abusive relationships. First thing we do is say, put your cell phone on the table, put your wallet on the table, put your car keys on the table, maybe even put your shoes on the table, and now let's talk about your options. And it's amazing how judges will identify when they can walk literally in the shoes of people with the situation of the people who are coming before them. But it's the third element of control that has really caught the attention of the media, and which you see again on the Arches, and you've seen in a number of the cases we've taken to trial. And that is the element of literal regulation, setting rules, formal and informal, about how women enact their everyday roles as wives, as mothers, how they cook, how they dress, how they care for the children, how they clean. Again, any of these things may seem completely trivial until you put it together into the hostage-like pattern, couple it with levels of intimidation that can be hostage-like, and see it as a pattern. And again, I encourage you to read the case histories that are being brought to trial now in England. As you may remember, one of the guys put his wife on a treadmill. He put a picture of the woman he wanted her to be, and would have her run on the treadmill for hours a day and punish her and beat her if she didn't lose weight and be on that treadmill. Now, why is that coming into court all of a sudden? It's coming into court because people are beginning to acknowledge that as part of the abusive pattern. The thing, so that's coercive control in a nutshell, and I describe it in some of the articles in more detail. We have data to support all of these claims. We're not talking about extreme cases. We're talking about the majority of the cases we see present some combination of these devastating behaviors. The other piece of the new offense, and in addition to the behaviors it criminalizes, is its recognition as, again, all of Europe has now recognized. Spain has recognized this in law. France has recognized it in criminalizing psychological abuse. The Istanbul Convention describes it as arbitrary violations of liberty. What we are recognizing now is that the major harms in these cases are not physical harms and not even psychological trauma. That the major harms in these cases are harms to basic rights and liberties that are so fundamental that people can't, women can't, nobody could practice citizenship without them. Freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom to own your own money, freedom to take a job or go to the job of your choice, freedom to go to school. All of these basic freedoms are being infringed. Dignity, freedom of autonomy, all these freedoms are being abridged on a regular basis. These are rights and liberties harms. And we're also coming to recognize, and again, this is embedded in the British law, in the English law, it's embedded in the Scottish offense that's about to be issued. It's embedded in the Istanbul Convention and in the UN doctrines of involving human rights. The most basic fundamental thing that's recognized that this is a form of discrimination that violates human rights and is not a crime against women or even a crime against a gender crime. It's a political crime because it's a crime against the attributes that people need in order to effectively perform their role as citizens in our society. And if this was happening to any other population in our society on the level it is, or was happening in a foreign country to our citizens, we would respond as one. When a homicide of a woman occurred, we wouldn't depend on the head of Women's Aid to do the interview. We would have the minister, first minister, do the interview, or the executive, or somebody come out and express their shock. So this is a huge transformation, thinking about a crime that has been treated heretofore as a second-class misdemeanor. It's basically equivalent to a serious traffic offense or not so serious traffic offense. Now reframing that as a crime against basic rights and liberties in which people's resources are being taken away from them, and thinking about this at the same level that we would think about other capture crimes, that we would say people in their homes have or in relationships, personal life, have the same rights to liberty and free expression and free movement as anyone else. The effects of this on our economy are absolutely devastating. Ultimately, what coercive control is about is not what men do to women, or I should say what men do to women. It's really about what they keep women from doing to themselves, by restricting their expression, by framing their behaviors, by redirecting all of their energies and their resources from the community and their children to themselves as individuals. And this is why we've begun to frame it as a serious criminal offense, taking it from magistrates' court to high court, where we find this chronic behavior, redesigned our policing of domestic violence so that it's not an end-of-shift response, but a major crime investigation, and really change the culture of response, which the Archers have obviously contributed to in a major way, so that this phenomenon is being taken a lot more seriously. Now, I know this is for mostly viewed way out of the kin of what you've understood to be Domestic Violence Month, where you go to the store and you see the woman with the black eye. The violence definition, I like to say, maybe it's not appropriate here, but I like to say the violence definition of abuse is sort of like President Clinton's definition of sex. But I won't go into more detail on that. But I think you'll get my point, that it's really a male definition. You know, did you abuse her? No, I didn't hit her. But it has never been women's definition. And we're getting surveys from countries like Turkey and Egypt, as well as from countries in the UK, in which women report, if someone takes my money, it doesn't let me leave the house, or times my phone calls, or monitors my movement when I leave the house and when I come back, that is abuse. And that's what we're saying. And somebody asked me on...
First, can I ask you just to wrap up?
Yeah,
I
I just finished with a little irony. I was asked on Scottish radio recently what I thought about women's violence against men in Scotland. And I said, only somewhat sarcastically, there's not enough. And what I meant by that was not that I endorsed women's violence, but what I was saying was, if the things that were happening to the women that we're seeing were happening to any significant population of men, there would be blood in the streets. That's what I mean. And that the only reason I believe that we're not responding more aggressively is because women are not grieved. Their suffering is not grieved at the same level as other groups. And I say that as a male who has as much controlling capacity. And nothing I'm saying is meant to suggest men are more controlling than women. I don't believe that. I don't believe they're more violent than women. There's no data that supports that. But when it comes to the pattern of coercive control, there's no question that 95 to 90%, 99% of the victims are women, and that their vulnerability is derived from their vulnerability as a class because of inequalities. I'm sorry.
No, okay, Professor, thank you very much. Very, very interesting. I'm loath to stop you, to be honest with you, but we have to push on because...
I'm not a minister, so you don't have to listen.
Well, we will open up to questions here, but I suppose I'll be very brief here in this because we are losing time. How do you get everything you've said, and I can understand it entirely, and the concept of it, but how do you actually get that down to, one, encouraging the woman or the victim, whoever that may be, to actually testify, and then secondly, for law enforcement agencies to actually gather evidence other than a testimony?
Well, let's deal with the second question first. When I said this is not an end-of-shift investigation, what I meant was that gathering evidence in these cases is not simply a matter of, it's not a one-on issue. Right now, somebody asked about the police response before. Right now, the police in Northern Ireland do three things. They take a picture, they write a narrative, and they fill out a tick box for a risk assessment called the DASH. The first thing we say to police with respect to evidence is, don't take a picture, open a window. In other words, yes, you have to take a picture if there are injuries, but police are used to identifying the crime with something they can photograph. By open a window, we mean the first thing you do is you get historical evidence. Much of the evidence you're asking about is already collected by police in the dash form that they check. The stalking, the sexual assaults are all supposed to be recorded, and if they're not recorded in that dash, they are recorded when the woman is sent to Women's Aid and fills out another copy of the dash. So much of that evidence is available. But the other thing we're realizing is that a lot of this evidence, some of which is non-traditional, is not simply available from the victim, but has to involve the kind of investigation we did when we were going after BBC commentators who sexually abused children. We were interviewing former partners, we're interviewing neighbors. We're conducting a serious crime investigation. And in this crime investigation, while the victim's testimony is critical, it's not solely critical. You notice that in 2 of the 4 cases that went to trial, the man confessed. And he confessed because the weight of the evidence that police were able to collect was virtually overwhelming. So that's part of it. The other thing is that there's no evidence that women have been reluctant to talk about this. What's happened already is that many women have come forward because for them, the idea that their abuse consisted only or even primarily of violence meant that unless they were seriously injured, they felt guilty about calling the police. So I think there is a public re-education project that's involved here, but the major challenge we face is not the re-education of women in the population about the nature of their abuse. The major education project that entails letting them know that this is a form of abuse in announcing a new offense that we will take seriously. And if you read the prosecutor's statement in the last sentence in June 10th, in England in this crime, he announced to the community the nature of this crime and invited people to come forward with stories of this type of control and abuse. So I don't see that, Mr. Frew, I don't see that as much of a problem. I think the major problem is going to be getting professionals to adopt to this. For police, it's a major change in police culture, and as you said yourself, many of these systems are risk-adverse, change-adverse. We're asking them to see a historical crime, a course of conduct crime, where previously they just saw an incident, a significant harm where previously they just saw, where previously they didn't see anything at all.
Do you think there's an issue too there with regards to the judicial system and how that looks upon this crime? Now,
absolutely.
Only coming into crime now is domestic violence, so to add a layer of coercive behaviour on top of that, some would say that it would scare the judicial system at this point in time. Well,
I don't know that it'll scare the judicial system because they seem insulated to most threats and accountability. But I think you're absolutely right that the major obstacle, we thought when we first introduced the offence that the Crown attorneys would be, the Crown prosecutors would be the main obstacle to enforcing this. That turned out not to be the case. Because it's a high-profile prosecution, they were supportive. Even though some frontline police announced immediately they wouldn't enforce the new offense, the fact is that the police have been amazingly cooperative because we've raised the status of the offense, and for the first time they're recognizing that they now have the tools, and I've heard this from Northern Irish police as well. They don't have the tools. They're gathering the information. Imagine if you gather information at the scene and you know a victim has been sexually assaulted and stalked and you don't have a tool to respond to that effectively, how it's going to feel when you leave that house, or even if you make an arrest to know that that guy's going to be back. But the judiciary is an obstacle that is enormous. And anyone who takes on this new offense and wants to pursue justice by recognizing the harms that women are actually experiencing must be ready to confront the judiciary. Not just confront the judiciary in terms of enforcing this new crime, because we have found champions in sheriffs in Edinburgh, in judges in various parts of England who stood up and prosecuted and heard these new offenses and made strong statements after they've heard the offense about the wrongs that they've been listening to. But the judiciary has been extremely resistant to training. They have resisted the involvement of Women's Aid in that training, the very people whose expertise based on experience is enormous in this. And they are an obstacle in terms of saying to us, look, we know violence when we see it. We don't need any training to do better. On the other hand, many sheriffs and also judges are as frustrated as are police with seeing these cases again and again. You may know that this whole movement in Scotland was stimulated because a member of Parliament was arrested for 18 years of domestic violence against 3 wives and beating his 16-year-old stepdaughter with a frying pan. And Chief Sheriff, Sheriff Mackey in Edinburgh was limited by the way the law was written to only sentencing him to 364 days. In fact, he didn't even have to leave government unless it was over a year penalty. To her credit, Sheriff Mackey made a public statement in which she bemoaned the fact that she couldn't charge the sexual stuff, she couldn't charge all the coercion, she couldn't charge any of the other elements of the offense, let alone group all of offenses in a single horrendous course of conduct. And her statement was really a stimulus to the Chief of Judicial Education and others in Edinburgh to move very aggressively on this. And in fact, they've taken the lead in Scotland in writing the new offense. So I do think that the judiciary presents a major obstacle that you have to be willing to confront with either in the states. I'll tell you what we do. In the states, we require all judges in a number of states, majority of states, not all, to have domestic violence training annually, usually at least a day. We require that all the relevant services, including our shelter and refuge services, be directly involved in that training. And it's been enormously successful. And this is not just in criminal court. This is, of course, in family court and child welfare proceedings, where this coercive control is in some ways even more pertinent.
Okay, I'll bring in Pam Comer.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Stark. I've been looking forward to this presentation from yourself, and you're very welcome today. I could listen to you all day on what is an awful subject, but it's one that has gripped me for a long time since I...
Well, the only thing worse than end-of-shift investigation is end-of-day testimony in a legislative hearing.
That's true, that's true. But thank you very much.
Not for me.
I've been involved with Women's Aid for a long number of years now.
Oh, have you?
In 2006 from I was a local government councillor, so and I've recently set up an all-party group on domestic violence within this assembly, which I chair, and have a local group of Women's Aid who are the secretariat to that. So this is very useful in going forward with that group. And you know, so far my involvement with them has been very much around awareness raising and approaching the subject, and I actually feel vindicated in that now, you know, given the evidence you've given us today, because really, you know, when you talk about conducting a serious crime investigation, I mean, that's, you know, so many miles away from how domestic incidents were treated, especially in the past. And I've heard testimonies from senior police officers who have said that they were actually ashamed of how they dealt with domestic abuse in the past through ignorance, genuine ignorance of what it actually is and how it actually operates. So very good to hear what you've told me. I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions. I had more, but you've answered most of them. Coercion and control, obviously at the very heart of how abusers operate, and they're not an added extra. This is what happens. And professionals, obviously, to some degree, don't recognise that and tend to focus, as you've said before, on the physical and sexual side of the abuse. How do we overcome it?
How what?
How do we overcome that?
How overcome professionals not recognizing it?
Yes.
Well, I think there needs to be an enormous amount of education, just as we did among domestic violence. When we first uncovered the fact years ago in our research at Yale that domestic violence was the leading cause of injury for which women sought medical attention, the medical profession absolutely didn't believe it. They sent people to Yale from Washington to disprove our research, and then they replicated it. And people were absolutely blown away. And the knowledge that is now sifting throughout Europe and really the world from women's stories and women's narratives is really beginning to change the way professionals understand this experience. And particularly when you put it in the rights context, and you recognize that these are violations of political rights. This is a political crime. I absolutely can't underline that enough. It's not a gender crime, it's a political crime, because it's a crime against our citizens. And that's the underlying piece of it. And if you don't take it seriously that way, it seems to me you can't address it. So I think professionals feel torn because they don't like to get involved in, quote, political issues, and this seems to them to be a loaded issue. But I think there's political and there's education that has to be done, no question.
And as far as England and Wales are concerned, obviously they now have these laws, and I have every confidence that we will go ahead as an Assembly and bring the same here. But what's happening as far as the education and the training of those professionals and the judiciary? What's actually happening?
Well, what's happening in Wales, which is very interesting, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, Wales has complemented the new offence with what's called the Wales Bill, which is essentially a prevention bill. That involved appointing somebody to advise the administrator, not at the ministerial level, but an advisor in the government who's responsible for monitoring an overall prevention strategy. Every local council and a health authority and others have to produce a plan within a certain period of time for the prevention of in that case, gender violence, right? And they are monitored in doing that, as well as given assistance. They also have, and this was very controversial when it was introduced, they also have introduced champions and an education system starting in the 2nd grade with respect to gender violence and gender equality. You can monitor some of this on YouTube. There's some marvelous examples, but it's in a very early stage. But the important thing is that they've combined two elements which the Istanbul Convention protocol recommends, namely implementing this prevention plan, building it collaboratively, and then having an accountability structure in place. So they get assistance to develop the local plans, but they're also being monitored and reviewed so that their plans meet a certain level and standard of competency. I think as part of that process, professionals are being educated. But the education takes place in the context of their actually having to make a plan, exert responsibility, educate themselves about it, and so forth. I can't say how it's working. It's too early. But I will say that what I expect to come out of Scotland, and in combination with what the Wales Bill establishes in terms of prevention, is in my mind the gold standard of where we are anywhere in the world with respect to responding to partner abuse. The British law, the English law, while good in some respects, the offence, has a number of serious problems in my view. But it's still, one of the best things we have. But it still has holes which we need to address. And I think in the next round, depending on who becomes PM, but I think in the next round, this will be addressed.
Thank you, and thank you finally for me, thank you for addressing the male-female as well, because as soon as you talk about domestic violence, the first person to come back at you is, what about the men? What about the men? What about the male victims of men? So, and we know from the statistics that it's the vast majority are male perpetrators against, and a lot of male victims are actually victims of other males. So.
Well, that's true. I mean, the main look.
It's an uncomfortable, not very politically correct thing to say, but I think it has to be said.
I think that there is no question that domestic violence by women against men can be a problem.
Yes.
When it comes to the repetitive violence that I described and the combination with sexual abuse and coercive control, the vast, vast majority is, for example, 53% of the men that we're arresting have committed 3 or more offenses. Only about 2% of the women we're arresting have committed 3 or more offenses. So that'll just give you some very minor sense. There are very few cases in which you have this. The main problem of violence against men, which I wish the groups that complained about women's violence against men would take on, and I would fully support them if they did so, is other men, as you suggested. That it's very difficult in a training program, a treatment program for perpetrators to say you can't beat women, but it's okay to beat up your next door neighbor, if he's a male. So, I mean, we have to start really, because it suggests a kind of patronizing, view. So we have to start really addressing men's violence against men. And to its credit, the Wales prevention strategy really does do that. And I think it's a very important step forward.
That's great. Thank you.
Michaela?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Professor Stark, for your presentation.
Retired Professor Stark.
Still doing a good job. Just like Pam said, I could listen to you all day, and I hope we can follow up this with maybe getting your email address, maybe, for some kind of communication to you if we have questions further down the road, because I know myself and Pam and Claire Bailey in this committee, who now sit on the all-party working group for domestic violence. But I share the concern also too, as I said to the Minister, you know, where the new coercive, obviously the new domestic abuse offence and disclosure scheme is about changing law and offer better protection for women. But rightly so, we also need to make sure that the measures are in place and the systems are in place robustly for the likes of the PSNI and the judiciary and the PPS, because obviously here to get a prosecution, there's a test and there has to be a reasonable prospect of an outcome to take that case forward to the PPS. And sometimes, maybe not just sometimes, maybe most of the time, whenever there is clear evidence of abuse historically, continually and currently, the outcome, when it reaches the PPS, they can just throw that out the door. And that's the sad reality. That's the sad reality of our judiciary here. So in terms of making sure that the mechanisms are in place, I'm concerned about that. I'm actually worried, and this is all great stuff. But I just would like to see through this, and maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the road, how the outcomes are. But I think you're right, education is key, and not just with those responsible for applying the law, but I think this needs to be educated within schools, for all genders, for all races, because it has no barriers, domestic abuse. And I also think that, you know, we need to ensure that the PSNI are trained to enforce these new laws around coercive abuse. And that's, as I said, that's the concern I have, that will we have the resources to do that? Will we have the budget to do it? And unfortunately, I don't want to talk money when we're talking about domestic abuse, but that's the reality that we face in this jurisdiction. I said earlier at a meeting today that I'm also concerned, whilst we're doing this, there's a bigger piece of work to be done as well, in terms of, and as I said, that this work is about ensuring better protection for people and individuals, men and women. But historically we live in this island where we have 2 separate jurisdictions, and I think, you know, I would like to see a bigger piece of work, joined up work, between the law here and in the south of Ireland, to ensure that the perpetrators don't get away across the border that we have here. So, you know, I look forward to getting, like the rest of us, the responses to the consultation on this, and seeing how we as a committee can take that forward into a piece of legislation here.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think especially trying to address this in the context of austerity and cuts is extremely difficult. The problem in Northern Ireland is a little different than the problem in England and Wales, because here reporting has been notoriously low. And the reporting of sexual assault is notoriously pretty much absent when it comes to partners. It's ridiculously low. So it shows that hasn't been identified as a specific and serious offense that the police want to deal with. But in general, this is the case. If this offense is enacted, reporting will increase. How dramatically it will increase depends a lot on special factors here that I don't really fully understand, or certainly you don't have control over. but it will increase dramatically in the short run, and that will mean increased police resources. What I can promise you is that within 5 or 10 years, if the chronic offenders are taken off the street, you will be able to reduce the police caseload, which is now primarily a domestic violence caseload, don't forget. It's the single biggest demand on the police. You will reduce the police caseload by 10, 15, even 20% within 10 years. I think in the long run, you can reduce it much more. Let me say this, which is very interesting. Domestic violence is one of the few crimes you can actually prevent. And how do we know that? Because the fact is, in public health, we make a distinction between what we call prevalence, which is all the cases in a community. Think AIDS, chronic disease, and incidence, which is new cases. Domestic violence, almost all of the cases are ongoing, long-standing cases. Only about 5–10% are new cases. So if you were effectively to intervene early on, you could eliminate, potentially, no one is going to do that, but you could certainly eliminate a huge amount of the domestic violence incidents in our community, which would overnight increase the quality of life in those communities dramatically and enhance women's contribution to the economy more generally. Then we could manage the incidence of the crime. So I think that's, that's a caution that I would definitely put out there. As I said, I think the Wales bill is addressing some of these education issues, and I wouldn't exaggerate too much the need for police education. Well, I think this is a critical piece, and unfortunately, because of the cuts, a lot of the training we're doing in England is computer-based. It's not adequate. We're also developing some very innovative training strategies. Durham University has developed a theatrical strategy of training police, which has had, we've now trained almost 600 police, and it seems to be going very, very well. So there are innovative ways to do this.
Can I just ask, all right, did I read somewhere that the new law doesn't apply to couples that are separated?
No. One of the gaps in the new law, and this refers specifically to the stalking provision, is that it does not, because they already had a stalking law in England that covered strangers, this law refers to stalking in the relationship. So we're in the very strange situation if John stalks her, cyber stalks her, or proxy stalks her, or stalks her on Monday and they're still together. That's prosecuted under the Domestic Violence Coercive Control Law. If he then leaves and goes to live with his mother and stalks her from his mother's house, that now is covered under a separate stalking offense. And it's crazy. And we try to convince Buckland on this, but the problem is that he introduced that was the rationale for the law in the first place, the gap in the stalking law. So that's the only thing. No, the new law applies to couples whether they're separated or together. But the stalking piece of it is limited only to couples who are together.
I think we should check out just what stalking laws we have here. I'm not
don't
sure
think we have.
We have harassment, but no stalking.
Right, Paul. Right now is my understanding. Right now is my understanding that Northern Ireland covers stalking under harassment, but that means it treats it largely as a low-level misdemeanor offense. In most countries now, stalking is considered. It can be a misdemeanor stalking offense, but most countries consider it a Class A felony. It's a high crime. And in fact, the people you're looking at, who are these batterers, fit the profile of some of the most serious criminals in the society, in the sense they're chronic offenders, they've committed other offenses. We know that if they're convicted, they're much more likely to be convicted again. Most of their criminal activity, in terms of the men we're arresting, is not domestic violence, but has occurred outside of that context. So in Scotland, they have, complementing the Marek process, which I assume some of you know about, what's called the MATAC. And the MATAC is an offender-focused process rather than a victim-focused process, where they gather all the information they can on offenders. They have a central data unit that assists local police departments and Police Scotland that gathers this data. It's very, very effective.
Okay, there's no further questions from any members.
Could I just ask a question? I was reading the paper there from Women's Aid. It's excellent. They raised the whole issue of children, the impact on children. And I think it says here that that's not taken into consideration when the police would investigate domestic abuse. Would that be the case? And what would the impact be on children?
Yeah, well, this is obviously a huge issue. Let me just say this, that until now, until the new offense and our understanding of coercive control, and I did the original research on this with my wife many, many years ago. We were the first to show that domestic violence was the leading context in which child abuse occurred. 45% of all the cases that we saw of child maltreatment occurred in the context of ongoing battering. And the paradox was that our child welfare systems were investing almost no money in domestic violence prevention. Once President Clinton gave us $1.5 billion, Child Protection got very interested in this problem, and we were able to talk and converse. So, you know, that's an important issue. At the time, our only major concern was children witnessing violence, growing up in violent households. What we are now coming to appreciate is that it's not the exposure to violence that is the major risk to children, but the exposure to this lack of democracy, these gender rigidity, these intimidating patterns of coercive control that harms children. For example, a child who's raised in a home with very rigid gender roles has more trouble adopting in school to the flexibility they need in order to get along in school than a child who's been exposed to physical violence. Moreover, in many of these families, the men who are using the coercive control on the wives are also isolating, intimidating, physically or sexually abusing, and also humiliating and controlling their children. So we're just beginning to get a handle on how this works in the child system. Unfortunately, in the child welfare system, still today, many women are being blamed by our social work system for being abused. I was the lead witness in a case against the city of New York in federal court in the United States. It was a 3-month trial because what the city of New York was doing was they were removing children from mothers solely because the mothers had been abused, like by being choked. They used the terms exposed to domestic violence. Even though the children themselves were not harmed by the violence, they were removing the children and charging the mothers with neglect. So we brought that to federal court. We had a 3-month trial, hundreds of witnesses, and the federal court ruled that it was unconstitutional against the U.S. Constitution to do that, to take children from mothers solely because they were victims. And we became the first country, as far as I know, now constitutionally to say that when you remove a child for domestic violence, you have to show that the harms that that child will suffer from removal are greater than the harms the child will suffer if they stay. First time anyone recognized that removal was not a benign process. Secondly, the court ruled that you can't remove a child solely because of domestic violence. You have to show specific harms. And thirdly, the court ruled that you can't punish women because they've been abused as secondary, even if they refuse services because of the domestic violence from child welfare. On the other hand, in the UK, it is still regular practice to remove children from mothers who have been victims of abuse. This is a terrible practice. And we have this strange system in the courts that Marianne Hester at Bristol University calls the 3 planets, where a woman who goes into criminal court is considered a good witness if she presses her case. But if she goes next door to the family court and persists in pursuing a domestic violence case, she's considered non-cooperative and is likely to lose custody of a child. In the family court, she's likely not to be, the man, as I said, I think before, is likely to be completely invisible. So one of the thrusts of this new law and of any reform that we have to engage in is to bring all the courts together. I don't know about the Derry experiment intimately, but it's really to get a single working definition so that the justice concerns in the family court, in the criminal court, are carried over into consideration of custodial assignments and the safety of the child in the family court. What we've done in Colorado, I'll end with this in terms of your question, but what we've done in Colorado, which is so far the best approach we've had in the United States, is we've said 3 things. First of all, that we're going to include safety along with the child's best interest as the criteria of custody assignment. Secondly, you have to know the family court in order to appreciate some of these things, but secondly, we're going to hear all the domestic violence evidence before we get to trial. So we don't have a situation where the abuser is interrogating the woman he has abused or raped. And thirdly, we've prohibited the court from punishing women who violate court orders to provide access to their children, for example, if they do so out of a genuine belief that they're protecting their children. That has reduced the complaints from women who are abused about the family court to almost 0. So it's very effective. And we passed, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution, which I testified on, the House Judiciary Committee, and then the sense of the Congress, that abused women should be given the presumption of custody unless there's evidence provided otherwise. In other words, that once there's abuse established, and the chief appellate judge in the United Kingdom made a statement many years ago that a man who, we've long passed the time where a man who abuses his wife can automatically be assumed to be a good father. But that is honored, that observation in the breach, not in the thing. So it's a huge, huge area you're opening, and a long way to go before we know what we're doing.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, no further questions, members. Okay, Professor Stark, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. I'm sorry to have kept you past.
No, that was an hour marathon session, and we thank you for it. And we look forward to seeing some of your work in the future and seeing how we can progress it here. So thank you.
And good luck with the consultation. And
thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, members, pushing on. I would ask for your indulgence because this is our last meeting, so I would ask if you can stay so we don't lose quorum. Agenda item number 6 is the oral evidence session on remunerating exceptional circumstances in the Magistrates' Court in Northern Ireland. Results of a targeted consultation and proposed draft rules. I advise members that departmental officials will attend the meeting to outline results of this. And the proposals for exceptional arrangements. The relevant papers are at the pages 165 to 197 of your meeting pack. Can I welcome Mark McGuckin, Deputy Director of Public Legal Services Division, and Mark McGuckin and Richard Kushney, Public Legal Services Division, to the meeting. You're all very welcome. I hope I've got everybody's name right.
Yes, you did. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, and just to welcome you all here, and just to remind you that this session will be recorded by Hansard, and it will be then published on the committee web page. So without further ado, Mark, invite you to brief the committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for your introduction. And given the lateness of the hour, I'll keep my comments as brief as possible, but to give you a flavour of where we are. Prior to the end of the last mandate, we presented to the previous committee proposals to introduce new provisions to provide remuneration in a small number of exceptional circumstances which can arise in magistrates' courts. The purpose of our attendance today is to provide an update on the outcome of the consultation on those proposals, to share the post-consultation report together with the draft amendments to the rules and associated ministerial guidance, and to outline the next steps. It might be of assistance to members of the committee who are new to this area of work for me to set out very briefly our current arrangements for remuneration in the magistrates' courts. In broad terms, around 30,000 certificates are granted for criminal legal aid in the magistrates' courts each year. In order to ensure that the work required against each of these certificates is properly remunerated, we have in place a matrix of standard fees which operate on a swings and roundabouts basis. The basic fees vary according to the mode of disposal of the case, that is, guilty plea, a contest or a committal to the Crown Court, and the nature of the offence charged. They are supplemented by a range of additional fixed payments for specific tasks. A range of case types are grouped together and a standard basic fee is applied to remunerate legal representatives for each case that falls into the category. The scheme is administrative, simple and predictable, both for the legal profession and for the Legal Services Agency. However, the potential impact of the standard fee approach has been subject to challenge in a small number of cases where it has been argued that the fee may not properly remunerate the work necessary to prepare a proper defence. The purpose of our proposals is to augment the standard fee with additional arrangements which will be available in very limited circumstances where significant additional work outside the norm is required. The standard fee matrix is capable of meeting all but a very few exceptional circumstances, so we have deliberately drafted the provisions to reflect this narrow subset of situations. We have not drafted this in terms of the class of the case that might be included, but rather the conditions that will need to be met. In response to the consultation, the Law Society and the Bar Council both considered that the proposed threshold is set too high and identified some additional examples of cases that they believe should be included. We consider that it is appropriate that the provisions should be tightly drafted and the emphasis is on the additional work required above the norm. We have therefore retained the proposed criteria as set out in the consultation, but we've supplemented this with draft ministerial guidance on interpretation. Arguments were also deployed for a higher fee, but we're content that the rate proposed is appropriate. Concerns were expressed about the retrospective assessment of exceptionality. There were suggestions that having approved hours in advance for a representative in an individual case, the Legal Services Agency could decide after the case had been completed that an additional payment in respect of those hours was not required. It is not the Department's intention that the agency would arbitrarily disallow a payment once the work was completed. However, the agency does have a responsibility for the propriety and regularity of public expenditure, and it will need to assure itself that the relevant work was reasonably undertaken and properly done. There is nothing new in this approach, and it applies to the assessment of fees in other situations by the agency. And it also reflects the position in relation to exceptionality provisions recently introduced in the Crown Court. This assessment process needs to be retained, but as with other aspects of this reform, we will keep its operation under review. The original consultation did not draw attention to appeals to the County Court from the Magistrates Court, but we recognise that it's also necessary to make some provision there, so that has been included in the draft rules and guidance. We've now translated the proposals into draft amendment rules and prepared draft ministerial guidance. These are before you today. Mr Chairman, subject to your consideration, it is our intention to proceed to the next stage. We have a statutory obligation to consult on the draft rules with the Lord Chief Justice, the Attorney General, the Magistrates Court Rules Committee and the County Court Rules Committee. We will also consult further with the Law Society and the Bar Council. We intend to commence that process now with a turnaround of 6 weeks, and that would allow us to return to the committee following the summer recess with a view to having the provisions and the new rules laid in October. That's the overview, Mr Chairman, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark, for being concise there. Yeah, I appreciate that, given the time. How much is this all likely to cost?
That depends on the level of demand, but we have profiled this and we believe that it should be somewhere in the region of 200,000. It just depends on the type of case that comes in. We can expect, I mean, one of the things that we've identified as an area which will potentially benefit from these provisions is in relation to assisting offenders, and depending on how those types of cases run, it could be quite large. But the generality of them, it's an additional piece of work relevant to what's already a relatively small fee, so it shouldn't be an exorbitant cost.
Is it the same as the? Well, I know they're two different court systems, but is it the same as the Crown Court?
It's the provisions in the way in which we've drafted the criteria is different, or sorry, is the same. But the difference is that within the Crown Court, we would expect in magistrates' courts the more serious cases and those which ultimately will require more funding to provide a proper defence will be elevated to the Crown Court. So you would expect that most of these are for much less serious offences, and therefore it's contained and it's a different order of cost.
We've seen in the past that the exceptional cases seem to become the norm. How do you prevent that from happening now?
Well, in what we've done in relation to these, and you'll be familiar from your work on the previous committee of how we took the very high cost case approach out of the system, we have tightened up significantly on the rules. But the point is that within a standard fee approach, while that is beneficial for everybody involved, you do get these odd occasions which should be relatively odd, and you've got 30,000 cases going through the magistrates' courts which are legally aided each year. It should be a very low incidence of cases which have that piece of additional work which is necessary and outside it. So we've drafted the provisions very tightly. We've learned from the experience of the very high cost cases and the approach which is adopted there. And we will be keeping this under review. And if there is a situation where it appears that it is going out of control, we will be looking at it very quickly and coming in to make any necessary adjustments.
The JRs and the Crown Court rules had very specific circumstances.
They did.
What is the basis for the current legal challenges on the Magistrate Court?
I think there are two effective challenges, and they are down to, I think one is a fraud case and one is a drugs case, and there are significant pages of evidence which have been presented by the prosecution in respect of those cases, which indicates a bigger case. That's the basis on which the challenge has been made. That is not to say, I mean, these provisions will allow those cases to be looked at, but that is not to say that after they've been reviewed that they would necessarily attract the exceptional status, but it allows them to be looked at by the Commission and a judgment to be made.
Okay. Michaela Boyle?
Yeah, Chair. Sorry, Mark, did you say that there was going to be a summer consultation process, or is that...
We have a statute, and when we draft, we've consulted on the policy proposals, and when we draft the rules themselves and the guidance, which we have a statutory consultation process with a number of people within the criminal justice system. That's the Lord Chief Justice, the Attorney General, and so on. And our intention is to process that over the summer.
Okay. We'll see that before October?
Oh, yeah.
Well, we will come back to you with the results of that, and that will lead into an SL1 and so on at that stage.
Okay, no further questions for any members, so I'd just like to thank Mark and his team there for coming along and waiting so long before you came to the table.
It was a very interesting session, Chairman.
Yeah, I agree. I hope all the members agree too. Yeah. But no, thank you very much for your attendance. Can I seek the views then of members on whether they wish to submit any views on the proposals at this stage, or are they content to wait and consider the draft rules in due course?
Happy to wait.
Happy to wait. Happy to wait. Okay, members. Thank you. Thank you very much. Agenda item number 7 then is SL1, the Offender Levy Road Traffic Order Northern Ireland 2016. I refer members to pages 199 to 206 meeting pack. And I advise members that the Department proposes to make a statutory rule under powers conferred by the Justice Act Northern Ireland 2011 to broaden the scope of the existing Offender Levy initiative by extending it to the graduated fixed penalties and financial penalty deposits scheme operated by the Driver and Vehicle Agency, where penalties and deposits are imposed on relevant offenders by its vehicle examiners. A full consultation on the entire offender levy policy was carried out by the Department, which concluded a public consultation exercise and stakeholder consultation. Consultees were in support of the levy proposals. Can I inform members that the Department plans to introduce the levy to endorsable road traffic fixed penalties and conditional offers of fixed penalty, that's speed camera detections, issued by the police in tandem with the making of this order. Can I seek the views of members on whether they are content with the proposed stat rule, or whether any further information is required, either in writing or by way of an oral briefing?
Sorry, Chair, forgive me for asking, or maybe I'll being a new member of the committee on this. Does this actually mean that the PSNI now have a responsibility of lifting the penalties? No?
I don't think they lift the penalty, but the penalty will be added on.
Yeah, and they enforce. I'm just reading it wrong.
Yeah. Now, I don't know. Now, is there may well be a bit of confusion as to SL1. Is it the DVLA and the police, or is it the police going to come forward?
It's the DVA who, in relation to this particular levy, when we're talking about the speed camera ones, it will be. I'm not sure whether it's the police or not in relation to that, but it's not dealt with in this SL1. This SL1 is simply the DVA.
I wasn't sure who was the responsible body.
I think what happens is that they add the levy on to whatever fine is imposed on you, and if you don't pay it, then they follow it up the way they would normally follow up non-payment. My understanding of how they follow up on them.
Yeah, no bother.
We can't seek that further information, you know, or...
It was just clarity around that. I wasn't sure who was the responsible body, but no, that's fine, that's okay.
Okay, so are members content at this stage then with the proposed stat rule? Okay, members, agreed. Agenda item number 8 is SL1 on Care Tribunal Amendment Regulation Northern Ireland 2016. Can I refer members to pages 208 to 215 of the meeting pack? Advise members that the Department proposes to make a start rule to amend paragraph 1 of Schedule 6 to the Care Tribunal's regulations, Northern Ireland 2005 and 2 respects. The first amendment specifies the types of decision of the Northern Ireland Social Care Council against which the Care Tribunal can receive an appeal, including appeals under the General Systems regulations. And the second amendment provides that the information required on the application form to the Care Tribunal also takes account of decisions made by the Social Care Council under Part 3 of the General Systems regulations and under new powers given to it by the Health and Personnel Social Services Amendment Act, Northern Ireland 2016. A joint consultation by the then Department of Health, Social Service and Public Safety and NISCC on the proposals to reform the model of regulation of the social care workforce in Northern Ireland was carried out from June to October 2012. The response to the consultation was overwhelmingly in support. Can I seek the views of members on whether they are content with the proposed start rule or whether any further information is required either in writing or by way of an oral briefing? I suppose the one thing I would look at there is that the consultation was October 2012 and it's taken this long to come forward, but apart from that it seems to be the case that there was overwhelming support. So on that, and I'm happy enough. Are members content? Okay. Agenda item number 9 is changes to the cost protection regime for environmental challenges, summary of consultation responses and the proposed way forward. I refer members to pages 217 to 284 of the meeting pack. I advise members that in 2014 the Court of Justice of the European Union held that the UK had failed to comply with its obligation under the Public Participation Directive to ensure that the court procedure it had in place to allow challenges to environmental decisions was not prohibitively expensive. The directive partly implements the Aarhus Convention on access to information, public participation in decision-making and access to justice in environmental matters. Can I inform members that the Department made regulations which limit the cost exposure for applicants to the relevant cases similar to those introduced in other jurisdictions in the UK. The European Commission, however, is not satisfied that the schemes introduced provide sufficient flexibility and clarity to ensure compliance with the directive, and the Department has accepted that some adjustments are required to ensure full compliance. I can also advise members that the Department launched a consultation on changes to the Cost Protection Aarhus Convention Regulations Northern Ireland 2013 in November 2015. It has now provided a summary of the consultation responses which indicated widespread opposition to proposals and consensus that they were a retrograde step in terms of the protection offered to environmental litigants. In light of the responses, the Department has revised its initial proposals in a number of areas, including the variation of cost caps, disclosure of finances, appeal costs, the costs applied in cases where a number of applicants or respondents and the costs of challenging. And I inform members that, subject to any views that the Committee or the Executive may have, the Department plans to publish the summary of responses and way forward document week commencing the 25th of July 2016. Implementation of the proposals will require changes to regulations and the Committee will have the opportunity to consider these in due course. So can I ask members if they are content with the proposed changes to the Costs Protection Scheme for environmental challenges governed by the Cost Protection Aarhus Convention Regulations Northern Ireland 2013, or whether they would like to submit any further comments or require any further information either in writing or by way of an oral briefing at this stage?
Chair, I can't quite work out, have the Department moved away or moved closer to the Commission?
I think they've moved closer, but then there was objections.
And they moved away again?
And they moved slightly back. I think, reading that.
Well, the third-party rights in these matters are very important, so I'm not content without further briefing.
Right, okay.
To agree that they proceed.
Okay, are members content then we'll maybe seek an oral briefing?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, agenda item number 10, review of voluntary community and social enterprise sector funding models, proposed consultation. Now I refer members to pages 285 to 307 of the meeting pack. Can I inform members that the Department currently provides approximately £5 million funding to various voluntary community and social enterprise organisations to deliver a wide range of services that provide support to victims and witnesses of crime and deliver programmes aimed at reducing offending. Can I advise members that the Department is now reviewing the way it provides funding to the sector for the delivery of services and is developing a new funding model which will move from core funding to full cost recovery and better focuses on delivering outcomes and contributing more directly to achieving departmental objectives. Can I inform members that the Department intends to undertake a 12-week public consultation and has provided a draft consultation document. The committee will be updated following completion of the consultation process. Now, I know there is a bit of concern out there with some of the bodies that we would deal with in the committee who deliver services. So with that in mind, can I seek the views of members on whether they are content to note the Department's proposed consultation on the review of the voluntary community and social enterprise funding model and to consider the matter further when the results of the consultation are available, or whether they wish to submit any views or require any further information at this stage?
Could after consultation, can we have
Yes,
the OJ
absolutely.
here to the committee to brief us?
Yeah, I think this will be a big one.
I was lobbied by victim support on this.
And Chair, when they come back to us, that's just a report on the consultation.
Yes, oh, absolutely.
Not
There's nothing out there by that stage. It'll just be briefings on the consultation results.
But I think the committee chair might want to write and say, even though this goes out, we very much reserve our position on this.
Yeah.
I certainly do.
Yeah.
You do, and Sammy was indicating that maybe as well. So.
Well, we could probably write and say, well, look, we certainly will need more information once this consultation ends and the results are there for us all to see. Are we content at that?
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't need to display. We don't need to display a position now at this stage.
Yeah. Well, like I'm not happy with it, you know, with the model. Just not.
Yeah.
But they can go off and consult on it. But I'm not happy with the model, and I'm sure they're going to get a huge response to say they're not happy with the model either.
Hopefully that will come out in the consultation.
Yeah, if the committee wants, we could, when writing back, to ask for the oral briefing on the results of the consultation and highlight that the committee is aware that there are concerns about this. So just to indicate, put on the record you're already aware there are issues around this, if you want.
Okay, members. Agenda item number 11, commencement of Psychoactive Substance Act 2016, an information paper on it. Refer members to pages 319 to 317 of the meeting pack. I inform members that the provisions of the Psychoactive Substance Act 2016 were commenced by the Home Office on the 26th of May of this year, creating a blanket ban on the production, distribution, sale and supply of psychoactive substances in the United Kingdom. Can I advise members that the Department has now provided an update on the arrangements in place for implementation of the legislation in Northern Ireland, pages 309 to 317. Can I ask members to note the current position unless any further information is required? Members content? Okay. Agenda item number 12 then is correspondence. Can I inform members that there are 15 items of correspondence at pages 320 to 409 of the meeting pack and 10 items at pages 3 to 23 of your tabled pack. Can I advise members that I will draw their attention to 6 of the items, and they will then have an opportunity to comment on the other items of correspondence. Item 8 on pages 362 of the meeting folder. Can I inform members that the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs has provided a copy of the letter it has sent to the Chief Constable regarding the proposed introduction of an online application process for firearms licensing. Now, this is something that I've been involved in and been lobbied on by the gun traders and country sports lobby. And anyone with a gun licence has spoke to me. It's basically where the police wants to put in an online application system fully by the end of August, I think it is. And some lobby groups are balking at that because they feel that the people out in the countryside just haven't got the access to the computers that they would require. And the gun lobby is looking for a rolling dual system for 5 years. Now, a 5-year duration is the time you'll need to renew your licence, so anybody within that 5-year time scale will have to renew their licence at least once in that time. So everyone will have to do it once. The PSNI seem to be saying, no, we can't run 2 dual systems, it's just too costly and the whole thing will buckle under the pressure. but I would be keen to get the response that the Chief Constable is going to give to the other committee, and I would seek that we write to ask for that response also, just to see where he's at.
I've been lobbied by gun clubs in my own area as well. Obviously there is an issue with rural broadband and where I come from, and a lot of individuals have said to me they, obviously have questions to ask, and they prefer to do it face to face, going into a PSNI station or otherwise, to raise their concerns around different issues. So there is, I know, a strong lobby against this.
There is another aspect to this whereby gun traders may well take up the burden on behalf of their customers, but again, that still has to be seen to be borne out. So,
is it a valid concern, Paul? I mean, I want to see what the Chief Constable is going to write back to them. But is it a valid concern? I mean, everything's done online now. So, I mean, we're talking about guns, but tax your cars got to be done online now. How do the farmers tax their cars? I'm just wondering, is it a valid concern that it's...
If you lived in West Tyrone, it would be.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? But they still have to tax their vehicles. It's done online now. There's not, everything's done online.
People travel from the country into libraries and towns to do that, because they haven't got access to good broadband.
It's more to do with the broadband issue. It's not a matter of they're opposed to having to go online to get access to apply for their licence for a gun. It's the issue around the broadband more in my area that would be the concern. Yeah.
And not being able to do that and missing out, obviously. And
again, I don't think anybody who's bulking against this is saying we shouldn't do this ever. It's the duration of time it takes to cross over from one system to the other. What the PSNI are saying, well, is we can't run two dual systems. We just can't do it. Operationally and cost-wise, we can't do it, and that's where the sticking point is at the present time. So I'd be keen to hear what the Chief Constable says in a renewed sense to see what back there.
There's flexibility, so I don't know.
Okay. So we seek the agreement. Can I seek the agreement of members to ask the Chief Constable for a copy of his response? Okay, item 10 then at page 369 of the meeting folder. Can I inform members that the Committee for the Executive has provided an outlined timetable for the Programme of Government 2016-2021 process, and has indicated that it intends to coordinate statutory committee responses to the second consultation on departmental action plans and the draft Programme for Government, which will take place in the autumn. Can I advise members that the departments will be developing detailed Programme for Government action plans over the summer for consideration and agreement by the Executive by the end of September 2016, prior to the second consultation? Can I seek the agreement of members to request a copy of the Department of Justice draft Programme for Government action plan for the meeting on the 15th of September to enable the committee to give initial considerations to it prior to the further consultation? If that would be okay, members, ask for that in advance. Item number 11 in at page 371. Can I inform members that the Committee for Finance has provided information on the Department of Finance 2017-2020 budget timetable and has set out a provisional timetable for statutory committee scrutiny. The Finance Committee will coordinate statutory committee returns on the draft budget. Can I advise members that departments are required to submit their budget returns by Friday the 2nd of September 2016? Can I seek the agreement of members to request information from the Department of Justice on its baseline position, its pressures, its spending priorities, any proposed efficiencies and the linkages to the draft Programme for Government for the meeting on the 15th of September? And that will enable the committee to give initial consideration to the draft DOJ budget prior to the consultation, if that's okay. Members, content. Item 1 then of page 3 of your table packs. Oh, sorry. Item number 12 then. Is this on the pack or the table packs? Table. Oh, sorry. And the main pack then, members. Sorry, confusion. Item number 12. Can I seek agreement for arrangements to be made for an informal meeting with Judge Marnan, to which other members will be invited? That came up at the strategic meeting. I'm just seeking formal agreement to make those arrangements. Members are content?
Good.
Okay. Then item number 1 of page 3 of your table pack. I inform members that a response provided further information on the sentencing policy review has been received. No date has yet been set for public consultation on eventual policy proposals and a list of those statutory agencies, organisations and interested parties who are to be included in the consultation process. That's currently being developed. The Minister has, however, confirmed that political parties will be consulted on all aspects of the review. The Minister would also welcome members' views on those who should be included on the stakeholder engagement process. In the meantime, the Minister has asked officials to carry a process of widespread engagement during the policy development stages, and this will begin in September of 2016. I inform members that the Department has offered to provide an initial oral briefing on the views emerging from the pre-policy engagement process, which is likely to conclude in early 2017, and to keep the committee informed of any developments in specific areas in advance of that timescale. Can I inform members that the Department has asked if the committee would be agreeable to sharing the research it has commissioned on sentencing guidelines mechanisms elsewhere and on international good practice when available. I wish that we suggest that an oral briefing is scheduled on the views emerging from the pre-policy engagement process, and also seek agreement that research commissioned by the committee to be shared to the Department, and can I ask members that if they have any views on which stakeholders should be included in the engagement process. So we're happy enough with an oral briefing. Can I seek agreement that research would be shared, and that can I ask members then that if there's any views on who should be included in that engagement process? Are members content? Any views on who should be included, or are you happy enough to
You can
think about it over the summer?
I mean,
okay.
if you want to think about it over the summer,
We've got time.
Back to you.
Yeah. Okay.
in September.
Item number 5 on page 15 of the table pack then is inform members of the response that has been received from the National Crime Agency to the committee's request for information regarding the resources and funding the NCA has available to it in tackling organised crime in Northern Ireland, what funding bids the agency has submitted or is considering following the Fresh Start Agreement, and the work it is undertaking in the context. Of course, this was raised with the Minister when she was here. Can I ask members to note that response, or is there any further work you want to do on that? That, I think, initially came from you, Alex, the request on the information on the NCA. Are you happy enough at this present time?
Well, I'd like you know, was aired, you know, adequately with the Minister.
Yeah.
And there was still no certainty that one way or the other the NCA were getting more money.
Yeah.
That was the outcome. You didn't know if they were getting Fresh Start monies. You didn't know if they were getting any other monies. The fact that they got no monies at all in the last 8 months have been asked to make a bid by the Secretary of State, I think, subject to correction, really does beg questions about what in the name of God's been going on over there. I think we should send a copy of that email or that letter to the Minister.
Yeah, and ask her to respond on it.
Yeah.
Okay, and then obviously you've posed the questions to her, which she said she would respond to. Item 7 then on page 18 of the table pack. Can I inform members that the request has been received from Autism NI and the National Autistic Society in Northern Ireland to make a joint presentation to the committee on the Broken Promises report launched by the All-Party Group on Autism. The focus of the briefing is to update the committee on the provision of services for autistic individuals and their families in Northern Ireland and related issues. Can I seek the agreement of members for an informal meeting beforehand with the chairperson and the deputy chairperson, which could be arranged, and then obviously other committee members would be invited to that before we would get a formal briefing? Are members content with that approach? Any other comments to be made on any other items of correspondence in the meeting folder or the tabled pack? I know that there are many, but I invite any members if they want to raise anything in correspondence. Are members content?
Content.
Okay, can I seek the agreement then of members to action the correspondences as outlined in the meeting folder and the tabled pack on the action points?
Agreed.
Agenda item number 13 then is chairperson's business. Can I inform members that myself and the Deputy Chairperson held very useful introductory meetings this week with the Lord Chief Justice and with representatives of the Bar Council, and both are very keen to support the work of the committee and continue the work on innovation in particular. So that's something that will be ongoing, of course. Can I also, through Chair's business, just to follow up from the strategic planning meeting, can I seek a formal agreement to request the following from the Department? 1. A progress report on the implementation of the Human Trafficking Act. And then also with regards to the Brexit, can we maybe ask about ramifications for both Justice Department and then also the PSNI, how it affects us, how it affects both of those?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay. Can I also then, can we also write can we also write and indicate that the committee wishes to see the consultation on the possible legislative changes to improve online protection for children taken forward as a matter of priority, and see a specific timeline for this? Members, this was discussed earlier in the strategic planning meeting. We talked about the previous mandate and the work that the committee had done and the presentations that we had received. So it's really basically just to keep the pressure on the department to progress this as regards to online protection. We covered that, didn't we? The progress report on the implementation of the Human Trafficking Act.
Great.
Agreed with that then? Members agreed then? Okay, agenda item number 14, any other business? Can I ask members if they have any other items they wish to raise?
No.
Okay, members consent. Again, thank you very much, members. That was a marathon session today. Minister was here and everything else, and it's the last meeting, so I wish you all very best over the summer. Contrary to what people think, we are not on holiday. We actually work in the summer in our constituency offices, so we'll just put that on record.
Was back here Monday?
I know. So item number 15 then, date and time of next and place of next meeting. Can I advise members that the next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on Thursday the 15th of September, 2 p.m. in Parliament Buildings, room 30, but that a strategic planning meeting to finalise the committee's priorities will take place on Thursday the 8th of September. The venue will be confirmed in due close, but I'm hazarding a guess it'll be close to Ballymena somewhere. Just so you members know.
It's all right. It's close to
Okay.